Regular meeting of the Encinitas City Council for Wednesday, January 17th, 2024 at 6 p.m. And if the clerk would please call the roll.
Councilmember Lyon?
Here.
Councilmember Ayers?
Here.
Councilmember Hensy?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Blackwell?
Here.
Mayor France?
Here.
Record will show that all members of the city council are present this evening.
Thank you. And if you'd all please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. And item 4 is special presentations and proclamations. And tonight we have a presentation by our Coastal Zone Program Administrator, Todd Moreau, on the Army Corps of Engineers, San Diego County, California Storm Damage Reduction Project.
Quite a name, huh? Thank you. Yeah, my name is Todd Moreau. I'm the Coastal Administrator. You got the volume. Basically here to give an update on the San Diego County project. We're partnering with the Army Corps of Engineers as well as the city of Solana Beach. For those that don't kind of know the background, the approved project that you see here on this plan includes the construction of a protective beach berm along 2 segments of shoreline within Encinitas and Solana Beach, with associated renourishment cycles varying every 5 years for Encinitas and 10 years for Solana Beach, using sand from offshore borrow sites for a construction project life of 50 years. Segment 1, which is shown here on the slide, is in Encinitas, and basically it includes a 50-foot wide berm that goes from Swami's. Essentially, you can kind of see here on the south end, so just north of Swami's and just south of Beacons. And essentially, we're going to be using 340,000 cubic yards of sediment that'll be compatible with the beach there. Our staging area is shown here at Moonlight Beach, kind of central to the project itself. And just the Solana Beach is referred to as Segment 2. And that is a 150-foot wide berm by approximately 7,200 foot long reach. And this one's essentially just south of Tabletops area. You can see the seaside parking lot here in the city of Encinitas. And then it's just essentially at Del Mar Shores Beach area, just north of the San Diego River outlet. And so the Solana Beach segment, or Segment 2, has currently mobilized and started construction. They are using the South Cardiff State Beach parking lot in Encinitas as well as Fletcher Cove for staging. The subline for Segment 2 has already been landed at Fletcher Cove, and dredging has begun this morning. The Encinitas segment, or Segment 1 schedule, is as follows. Project mobilization is scheduled to be March or April 2024 at this time. There's about a 60-day construction timeframe approximately to construct the berm. Dredging will occur 24 hours a day, including at the pipe outfall to keep it free and clear. And the shore equipment building the berm will operate during standard construction hours. And so demobilization essentially would be sometime in June at the soonest. Now there's kind of a second schedule being developed based on the job that occurred in San Clemente, which is part of this project. Currently, that job is unfinished. They started it about last month, and they're about 10% complete. But basically had to stop because the borrow site had a lot of rocky material in there. So they're further evaluating that site and looking to see where the fines are as far as the sand. And with that in mind, San Clemente may start in March, moving us back 2 months to start essentially in May to finish their berm. Their berm is a smaller project. It's about a 240,000 cubic yard berm that's 50 feet wide. So it's about a month's time frame to build it. So those details are kind of being worked through Army Corps over the next few weeks to see whether we would go first and stay on schedule or San Clemente would start again. So the first phase, kind of in what we're going to be seeing here, is landing the subline. And the subline for our project gets landed near D Street. Basically, the subline is the pipeline connecting the dredge boat to the shoreline. And the subline gets floated in by tugboats, as you can kind of see in this slide. They float it in, and then front loaders actually grab the subline and pull it onto the beach. And then they basically sink the subline onto the seafloor, and then they keep it capped until the project starts. So you probably saw maybe the subline at Solana Beach was capped there for about 6 weeks. So right now we don't have a subline because the subline we were supposed to get was San Clemente's. And I think we got an echo over here. With San Clemente's, so since that project's still in the process, then we're turn that one off. Yeah, thanks. We were without a subline, so we're kind of waiting for one of those to complete. So upon the subline being landed, safety, signage, and fencing will be placed around the subline, as you can kind of see here in this photo. The subline itself is capped from the beach side until it's in use. Let's probably turn it on. Public safety closure signage that's shown will be placed adjacent to the subline. So you'll see these out and around the subline itself and near the common paths of travel near D Street and kind of Moonlight. We'll have QR codes, as you can kind of see on the sign itself, to basically allow people to kind of scan it and find out the current status of the project on the city's website. As well as there are the contact phone numbers there for Army Corps, as well as our Marine Safety Division. Additionally, we'll have information signs out at the site. Same thing with QR codes directing citizens to the website, as well as the direct project contacts and email addresses for the project. And so this is the Bayport, which is the hopper dredge that has been contracted with Manson Contracting, which is our contractor. The Bayport is approximately 300 feet long and 54 feet wide. It's basically, a hopper dredge, and it functions kind of like a vacuum, pulling up sediment fill from a borrow site at the seafloor through suction pipes that drop on the sides of the ship, and then, basically pulls along the borrow site, sucking up the sediment. Basically, this dredge can hold about 3,000 to 4,000 cubic yards of sediment with each carry. It takes it about an hour to fill up offshore at the borrow site, and then about 2 hours to push out the sediment onto the beach. And then obviously we've got travel to and from the borrow site as well, and they're estimating that time to be about 7 to 8 hours per round trip per load. And then sand would be dredged from offshore beyond the depth of closure using borrow sites previously designated as part of the San Diego Regional Beach Project. And those are referred as SO6, SO5, and MB1. Basically, that material will be placed directly into the receiver sites, both Solana Beach and Encinitas. The volume needed for the Encinitas segment is 3 to 4 million cubic yards, and Solana Beach needs 2 to 3 million cubic yards for the 50-year project duration. The total available in all three borrow sites is about 16 million cubic yards, so we have more than enough to achieve the 50-year projects. Also, the necessary real estate rights have been obtained for the full 50-year life of the project. And so Encinitas, at this time, is going to be using the SO5 borrow site, as you can see in the slide here. And that one's directly off of San Diego Lagoon Inlet as its first direct source. The site was surveyed extensively as an adequate site through the 2022 calendar year, and additional surveys were conducted in December of 2023 by Army Corps, showing that this area is still viable for both Segment 1 and 2. as an acceptable sand nourishment source. And so we'll continue and monitor it through the process as we use that site. The haul route or construction hauling route to assemble the staging area is going to happen at Moonlight, and essentially the route will be off of Interstate 5, down Encinitas Boulevard, through West B Street, onto the beach directly. And then the same thing is the path of travel will be out that area back to the freeway as they decommission the site. So there won't be on any other roadways as they've been directed. The fenced-off staging area at Moonlight will house the various front loaders, dozers, modular trailers, and dredge pipe. During the process, there'll be a fenced area in this configuration or similar at that area, so we still have access to the volleyball courts and use and life safety access around that fenced-in area. But basically, they'll stage the pipe as they build out certain portions of the beach. Down at the actual outlet, there'll be some type of fenced-in structure initially, but obviously with high tides, that's gonna be problematic. So we'll just have to kind of watch it. But we'll have to essentially have, security or people watching each side with flags to keep people out of that area until they build up essentially a dike or a berm. And so this is the sediment basically comes out at super high velocity out of the dredge pipe. So you can see this is Solana Beach today. The dredge is approximately 2,000 feet offshore, and it's just coming out full force, high velocity. And then here they're starting to kind of basically build the dike or the berm to where they can kind of collect it and then start building the beach berm. And this kind of shows it better. So basically the area within the intertidal zone will have a dike or berm created by front loaders and bulldozers as sediment is deposited to allow the extent of the berm to be placed. Steel piping will be hooked up to the dredge pipe subline and then ran up or down the coastline depending on what segment they're building. This picture shows the steel pipe essentially here on the beach, which would be connected to the dredge off the photo that you can't see, and they'll build it. So as our subline lands on the shore, they'll have a turn that'll then go north towards beacons, and there's enough pressure power on the ship to actually force it through the tube. So 2,000 feet offshore, and then literally 6,000 feet north to build that segment as they build that berm back. And so this kind of shows the plan segment of what we're looking at as our first segment. So this is our first kind of 50-foot wide segment. This is our subline coming in. The ship essentially hooks in right here and then forces the sediment at an angle kind of through two reef sections to a sandy bottom. That's why our subline is in that configuration. And so we'll build this 50-foot wide berm as the first portion of the project. And then we'll build 3 more sections. So each of those segments will go north, take about a week to build. And then kind of as they build these, they may open up sections depending on safety and how they can do that to allow the public access to those pieces. And this just kind of shows, this is San Clemente, as they were kind of building up a portion of the beach. You can kind of see they had their subline near the pier. And then this would be the last 2 segments, and Encinitas would then go south towards Swami's. And then, once again, this just kind of shows the subline. This is San Clemente again, kind of in the process. Same thing, their construction area. You can see the staging, the pipe staging. So that pipe's kind of mobile, even though it is steel. add and remove sections as they build it out. And then this is the floating subline portion for the dredge to actually hook to. Public safety program essentially includes public signs to be posted at multiple locations along the project reach. Equipment moving along the beach will have spotters at all times. Temporary construction fencing around the dredge discharge area will be placed. Both construction spotters as well as Encinitas life safety staff will be present, monitoring the whole reach. And then obviously no public access in active sand placement areas will be allowed. As far as public outreach and communication, this has kind of been ongoing throughout the process. We will continue to update the public at city council meetings as needed with addition of press releases, e-blasts, and social media posts. Additionally, as stated before, QR codes will be on our public signage out there in the field to where they'll have direct access to current information on the project. And if you need to get a hold of me, this is my direct contact, and that's our update and available for questions.
Thank you. What are the borrow sites? I saw the borrow sites for the Solana Beach. I don't see a picture of the Encinitas borrow sites. Where are they located?
It's the same borrow sites. So
the dredge is going to cruise to those borrow sites, those two right there.
yeah, it's going to
I
cruise
see the Del Mar Fairgrounds, so it's the one off of out of the San Diego River.
right here. Yeah,
Yep. And then the one SO6.
that's in front of San Alejo, essentially. But this is the one that we're both going to be utilizing at least this time around.
Okay. A question I've been asked recently, because this is a 25-year long process to get to the point where we're putting sand on beaches. When you look at Beacons Beach and how devoid of sand it is, how sandless that beach is, it makes one wonder why we didn't include Beacons sand replenishment as part of this. And I'm assuming that back 25 years ago, somebody made a decision, maybe it was 20 years ago, 15 years ago, but the NEPA and EIR process the reach was determined long ago and didn't take current factors into consideration.
Technically, that's true. Yeah, I mean, it did get evaluated, but yeah, ultimately, it did not get included in this approved project.
And so a lot of those Beacons Beach goers would like to know where we're getting sand to put on their beach.
So this berm, is set to kind of be there for about a 5-year period. It will migrate north and south, so we will have some migration towards that area. But we are studying that as part of the Regional Beach Sand Project 3. So the entire coastline, we're looking at additional offshore borrow sites.
There was supposed to be a Bataquitos Lagoon dredging as part of the Build NCC freeway work, but that got postponed until when?
That's 2024, 25 is what they're saying. Yeah.
And who do we talk to try and accelerate that?
Well, it's Fish and Wildlife that manages
Fish and
that.
Wildlife?
Yeah.
Thank you. Councilmember Hensy.
Thank you. It's really a fascinating project and presentation. Thanks for going into such detail. I have two questions. One question is, San Clemente, their project stopped because they were getting too much cobble. And I'm curious to know, it sounds like our studies have been conducted more recently, so we're more aware of the sediment that we're getting. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I think that the site that they chose was off of Oceanside, and it was an older site that hadn't been used as often. So I think the data they had was older. So that's what they're kind of reevaluating at this point. But yeah, our site last year, we looked at it. They retested it again in December. And I met them out in the field today at Solana Beach, and they said it was, more than adequate. So I think we're excited, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. My second question is, I know usually we have a prohibition about construction activities on our beaches between Memorial Day and Labor Day. Is that condition not implied with this project?
Probably not, because we did get a variance, for this project, both in noise and construction standards, but that is something that we have to evaluate. That's kind of where we've been advocating to keep it on schedule. But we'll have to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I do hope that we can keep it on schedule. Like this timing is working out well for us because we avoided the winter season of having lost a bunch of sand newly placed with the last set of storms. So I hope we can do everything we can to keep it on schedule. And also the point that the mayor brought up with getting sand to beacons. Oftentimes in the summer, I know the south swells can push it northward. So that would be great if that placement does stay on schedule.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Councilmember Lyons.
Thank you. We're really excited to have the sand on the beach. Just one clarifying question. I believe I understood you to say that the sand, when it's dredged, is going to be placed on the intertidal zone. Could you characterize that or clarify that for me, what that area is?
Just the shoreline, essentially, the movement between the high and the low tide, essentially. Yeah, so it would be kind of this general area here if you're looking at the slide.
Okay.
Yeah, the difference between the tides is
Okay.
intertidal, yeah.
That's all I needed. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, thank you, Todd.
Sure.
Let's hope we stay on schedule.
Yeah.
With that, we'll move on to item number 5, which is oral communications. I assume they're,
Yep, just a reminder to the speakers under oral communications, speakers are to speak on items that are not listed on the agenda. Call you 3 at a time, and you do have 3 minutes. John Hutchins, Dolores Welty, Kelly McCormick, and then Scott Campbell.
Well, actually, yeah, I wanted to speak to that subject, but he just spoke about it, so
Okay, go ahead.
well, yeah, I would just to add to your question, he had mentioned, he could begin as late as May, and, which would certainly cut into that season, and my main reason in coming here was to, express the need for that beach in so many businesses, and although I don't have a business in Encinitas as such, I live on 3rd Street, and it's a big part of living here, and I hope everything goes well. And also, I was unable to find anything online previous to coming here, which is why I'm here. It's because I wasn't able to find anything online, so if there'd be any way possible to perhaps put something online for people like myself who are curious on the subject, that'd be great, and that's all. Thank you very much.
yeah, I did see in the presentation that we're supposed to have a dedicated website for that. Is Todd, do we know what the URL is on that?
No, I wasn't able to find anything.
Jessica? When will that be operational? Okay. We'll get the word on the website.
Dolores Welty, Leucadia. I brought you some statistics about salaries some time ago, and I want to talk again about world economics or U.S. economics as pertains to California housing prices, because we have a really exceptionally expensive bunch of houses here. And I would remind you that the people who could buy a house in Encinitas had to either be a teacher or a fireman, an open house at that time, or a beginning home at that time that I brought forward those statistics. They were from the Union Trib. I would say that our housing price problem started with the housing bubble. And when it broke in 2006 and 2008, what happened was that those securities of mortgages that had been split up and divided were purchased by people with money, a great deal of money, who bought 2,000 homes at a time. You can read the book. It's called Home Wreckers. It names Steve Schwartzman of Blackstone Investment, and of course Steve Munchin. And those two Steves bought up so many houses that at low 10 cents on the dollar prices and put them into rentals at going rates. And the book tells about one woman who lost her house. She was behind $12 on her mortgage. At any rate, any losses that the two Steves had was covered by the U.S. government. So, second of all, there's been a lot of money laundering, and there are empty places in New York, skyscrapers, in which this buddy sold a house to this one and sold it back just to get their money out of Russia, for example, or someplace else, into U.S. dollars. I don't know if that happened here. Third of all, if you make $16 an hour, which is now the minimum wage, let's see, 70% of your salary goes to shelter, because a $16 an hour makes roughly $2,800 a month before taxes, and the cheapest studio in Encinitas, one bath, is $1,950 a month, according to what I saw on the internet now. Your own statistics say that most of these rentals, most of these low-cost houses, over 65% are wanted by people 55 and older. What they want is to keep the equity they've got and go in a cheaper house.
Thank you.
Hello, this is Kelly McCormick. I'm a public health educator with San Diego Alliance for Drug-Free Youth. Tomorrow night at 6 o'clock, Torrey Pines High School is hosting a forum to educate students, family, and community members about the dangers of fentanyl. And of course, it's open to all San Diego Union High School District families and the larger community as well. Former DEA agent Rocky Heron will share his firsthand experiences. He's a wonderful speaker if you've never heard him. And so will Laura Brinker White, who lost her teenage son to fentanyl. Her son, Connor, attended high school in San Diego. He took a pill given to him by a fellow student because he thought that it would help him cope with his anxiety. He was unaware the pill was counterfeit and contained a deadly dose of fentanyl. He was not at a party. He was at home by himself in his bedroom. Through my job, I have come to know Laura and many other parents who have lost their teenagers and young adult children to fentanyl. There are common threads in all of these deaths. Most were taking pills to try to deal with mental health issues. None knew the drugs they were taking were counterfeit. And all of them began their drug use journey with marijuana, again, to try to cope with mental health issues. If we are to combat this scourge of fentanyl, we must begin where the drug journey begins, and that's with marijuana. There is a great need for much more education on the risks of young people trying to self-medicate mental health issues with marijuana or other illegally obtained drugs, and a need for the city, as well as the school district, to provide this information, especially with marijuana storefronts opening soon in Encinitas. Thank you for your consideration.
All right, good evening, Council. My name is Scott Campbell, and I'm going to talk for myself a little bit, but I'm going to start off with the Encinitas Citizen Review Panel, something that you probably haven't really thought about. First off, we got a new sneak picture with some flowers from last year. Hope we get this many bountiful flowers this year. People have been really busy. We did a chart. We calculated how many meetings the council has been having. And if you look at what's going on in the last 3 years, it's incredible growth. It is absolutely incredible. Why do we have so many meetings? I have to ask, and I hope that the council discusses this somehow, some way, because this costs a lot of money. It costs staff time to attend these meetings and to work these meetings. It costs preparation time to prepare for the meetings. It costs council time when you could be doing real meetings and not some of these special ones. It costs the community time trying to keep up with what everybody's doing here. Part of our job, and Luke Schaefer mentioned this, our job is to monitor the council. I can't keep up. We can't keep up as a city with all of these meetings. It's impossible. Okay, so I'm halfway through. Any questions on this? You can go through the agenda reports. And I want to talk to Jessica a little bit later about if there's better ways to search some of this stuff. But on a personal level, on the sand stuff, Kelly, you're right on the money. The south swells will push the sand up on the beacons, probably more than we have this year. After last year's devastation, we're probably going to do better this year. And the more it delays, actually the better. The longer we wait to get stone steps done, the better it's going to be. Because there's less probability that north swells come in and wash the sand to the south. That's what you're asking for. Now, the reason you're not doing beacons is because it's been divided up on the maps, and beacons isn't in the rotation. It'll probably be in the rotation next time. We got a 50-year cycle, so it's probably going to be on there. No, it's never going to be on the rotation ever, because we've already done sand there. No, okay. So, anyways, that was what I wanted to talk to you about in general comments was this incredible increase in meetings. Thank you for your service and your time.
Mayor, that does conclude oral communications.
Okay, thank you to all for those comments. And we did not have a report, a closed session today, so there is no report. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
No changes to the posted agenda. And then moving to the consent calendar, items 8G and 8H have been pulled by members of the public.
And then I'd pull 8E.
Which did you pull, Bruce?
E.
E is an echo.
I'll move
Okay.
approval of the balance.
I'll second.
Motion carries unanimously. That takes us to item 8E.
And I don't need a staff report. So, when staff's ready. So I went back, and I think we discussed this during my briefing. I just wanted to modify the motion for this one to include the poles to prevent cars from circumventing onto the sidewalk by putting a pole on the outside edge. When I went back and looked at our original action when we approved this, it was actually in the motion to include that, and I didn't see it on the plans. So I'll make a motion to, I'll make a motion to approve the item with the addition of the poles on the outside edge of the sidewalk, like the original approval, and then if staff wants to comment.
Yeah, we took a look at that. I think there was a misinterpretation. So the direction was to add posts to prevent people from going around the gate. We added the posts in the pavement, but it sounds like the intent was to add them outside the sidewalk. So on the north side of the area where we'll have the gate, I think Ben's going to share a picture. We have a very significant hedge there, not that side. Yeah, that side. There's right at the edge of the sidewalk, there's a hedge there. So we can remove some of that. It's in our right-of-way. Or if you think that's sufficient to keep cars from going around, then we can just put a post on the other side where it's a little more open.
I just want to prevent the cars from getting around there, and hedges aren't necessarily permanent, but posts tend to be.
Sure, we can do it on both sides then.
I'll second the motion.
Start voting. Motion carries unanimously. That takes us to item 8G. And the speaker is Sheila Cameron.
Can this go up and down, or what?
Yeah.
Is it
You can pull it towards you and it will.
The podium.
Well, now I'm back there, but anyway, I'm going to cover both G and H, Sheila Cameron, because they are both change orders. The first one is with Tetra Tech for an increase of $166,334. The second one is with, I think it's called Svitek, for $147,505. We make contracts with people, and it's always bothered me that these companies put in for what they think something is going to cost, but somewhere along it comes up that, oh, gee, we need more money. So here's a total of $313,889. That's $314,000. Next week, it'll be another couple $100,000 for this contract, a couple $100,000 for that contract. This bothers me. It always bothered me when I was on council, and I really went after people on it. I think that when we contract with somebody, we should get some kind of assurance that they're going to stay within their contract, or maybe they should cover the costs. I don't think this is as prevalent in private industry as it is with government agencies. That's all I wanted to say. That covers both HE and H. Thank you.
Thank you. If staff could respond to that and specifically focus on the nature of these change orders. These are, and it's not that they forgot something in the contract. If there's something in the contract and they come to us and say, oh, well, it cost us $100,000 more to do this part of the contract, we don't approve that change order, correct? That request?
That's correct. I can speak on item 8G here specifically. The items that are here specifically, we didn't have the scope for it because when the contract was written back in 2020 and we got approved, we didn't have the scope for construction. The items that are mostly in this amendment are for CMA during construction, and the contract we awarded back in 2020 was for design services. But to get a project all the way through construction, starting at design, you start with design. You have to have construction management during the construction process, and until you finish the design process, you don't have a good idea what that's going to cost. So the plan all along was to add this. We didn't have the scope, and we didn't know what we could use for it for a fee back in 2020.
And I seem to recall on another Santa Fe project, which was the undergrounding of utilities, there was no way to know just exactly what was below the ground, and it created some complications that the contractor wasn't expected to be do for free, right? So it is normal to have these kind of change orders come up?
That is correct.
I agree with Sheila that it's frustrating, but it is not something that we just say, okay, here's another $100,000, right?
Yeah, and a quick note on 8H, that's actually a good news story. The grant that we were awarded for this LED light conversion was back in 2017. Since that time, the technology has improved and the unit cost has gone down substantially. So although we got a grant for $718,000, our construction bid was much lower than that. So what we're doing is we're adding a bunch of scope and we're adding more lights with the grant funding that we already have available to that contract.
Okay, Councilmember Ehlers.
And that's exactly what I wanted to bring up. I think you also provided me with some numbers because I was curious, where are we in converting all our streetlights? And you gave me numbers that we have roughly 386 LED streetlights in out of 2,200. So the more, and this is actually extending further into that, again, eventually we'd like to convert them all to energy-saving LED. So thank you.
Councilmember Lyons.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to further kind of highlight the item 8G, where this is for the Santa Fe Drive project, where we have a contractor on board already for the western section, so that's a good news story. But I also see this as a good news story in that we were able to find additional money for not only the design consultant to help with the construction phase services, but also to conduct some more outreach. Tell me if I'm getting this correct. But what I understand is that we're also going to help to improve the safety by doing some outreach with the schools to educate them about safety in the area, and also bring the east segment of Santa Fe Drive forward as far as the design. Could you clarify if I'm understanding that correctly?
Yes, that is correct. Task 8 in the amendment is for the non-infrastructure grant piece. When the grant was awarded back in 2016, this plan was approved and this requirement was put in. But you don't do this until right before you begin construction, you monitor, and then after construction on the eastern phase, then you do the outreach, which we recently saw at El Portal and other places. So that's again why we didn't put it into the beginning design contract in 2020. You wait until you're about ready to go to construction, and this task gets added to the project, basically. And yes, that will have outreach events at San Diego Academy, at Ocean Knoll Elementary, and other items that will happen. And this contract is for both the western and eastern phases of the project.
So I do appreciate that we're able to move the money forward and use additional monies, use the projects, move the projects forward using additional monies. But I do appreciate being very vigilant about what the cost of construction is and really monitoring it. I think it's our fiduciary responsibility to keep an eye on that, and I'm glad to get this additional information on it. Thank you, Sheila.
Okay, I would, since both of those were pulled by Sheila, I would move we approve both 8G and 8H.
I'll second. Oh,
I'll second.
okay. Joy.
Sorry.
Oh, no, it was you, Bruce.
Oh.
Motion carries unanimously. That completes the consent calendar, takes us to item 10A.
Okay, 10A is annual report and 5-year findings concerning the Mitigation Fee Act for fiscal year 22-23, and a contact person is Finance Analyst Ramos, and a bunch of other folks from the Finance Department.
We're ready. Good evening, Honorable Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Council members. The item before you is the Mitigation Fee Act Annual Report and 5-year findings for fiscal year 2022-23. Some background on this report. The Mitigation Fee Act is part of the state government code, which governs the establishment and administration of development impact fees. The government code has a number of requirements, such as having separate funds to avoid commingling with other revenues, producing an annual report making specific information available for each fund, and every 5 years making certain findings regarding unexpended fund balances. These reports need to be available to the public within 180 days after the last day of the fiscal year and brought to council at the next regularly scheduled meeting. The purpose of development impact fees is to mitigate the impact of planned new development on city facilities to maintain an acceptable level of public service as the city grows. Fees must have a specific use and reasonable relationship to development. These are defined in impact fee studies. While cities are not required to have development impact fee programs, cities that choose to establish a program must follow state government code requirements. Encinitas collects 9 different fees in separate funds to mitigate impacts on parks, traffic, open space and trails, community facilities such as the library, fire protection like fire stations, and flood control. Section 1 of the report meets the annual reporting requirements summarized in this slide. And Section 2 of the report provides findings for the 5-year period of July 1st, 2018 through June 30th, 2023, and meets the 5-year finding requirements listed here. And with that, staff recommends that council reviews and files the report to meet the state mandated requirements. And we're available if you have questions.
And Mayor, we do have one public speaker.
Okay. Do we want to hear from the public speaker first? Yes, we would like to hear from the public.
Scott Campbell?
So once again, my name is Scott Campbell. I live in Encinitas District 1. I'm representing Encinitas Citizen Review Panel, and we found this very interesting, this 5-year report. I'm pretty sure the majority of the people on the dais have not experienced one of these before. I've never seen it before. And there's good stuff in here. My ask is to be what you're going to do with the unspent funds. That's my number one ask. So let's get to it. Oh, no, what did I do? Okay. Okay, so we collect fees from these development projects, these housing element projects and ADUs and single-family homes, multifamily homes. We collect fees. We have a fee schedule. We'll get to that. What do you plan to spend the money on? There's a mandatory spending element every 5 years, or every year, I think you have to spend the money, and you can't be below, and it's pretty complicated. Negative numbers are good. I'm not a finance person, but I do understand that part, the Schedule C. Let's be realistic. We've got all these housing elements that we were in an incredible rush to pass through the Planning Commission and through the council last year and the year before. And now they are languishing. One of them, they graded a little bit of dirt. There's an ugly fence. They're sitting. Clark Avenue, what has been nothing but fires and complaints, safety complaints. Safety complaints. I mean, I'm glad we have a commissioner here tonight. What's going on with all this stuff? We're going to have less money to spend. Look at all those in the red. Those are money that we need to spend right now. We're over the scheduled numbers. So here we go with the development fee rate. Sorry for the font. There's too many different funds. I didn't have time to lay it out good. My ask on this is that we increase a lot of these rates. These are rates that go back to 2018, 2017, probably back to 2011 even. I didn't have time to go, and there's no documentation on that. I couldn't find it. Housing prices have gone to how much in the last 10 years? These rates have paled in comparison to that. Inflation has gone up how much? We need to keep up our money on this. There's a lot of money that we need to start spending on parks. I didn't even get to that part yet. There's money that we have for park acquisitions. And here we are talking about selling parks. It is so confusing. But once again, please raise the rates on this stuff. There's a lot of old data that we can update this year. It's election year. I don't know if I should be giving you this good stuff, but I care more about Encinitas than the election. Thank you.
That concludes speakers.
Thank you. Councilmember Ehlers.
See, question for staff. The flood control Fund 239, I believe can be used for stormwater, and I know we had quite a few expenses in stormwater. I'm a little surprised since we laid out, 3.7 million or so for the sinkholes, various sinkholes. Why didn't we pull this money and use it for that and therefore have it used up for the 5-year plan? Any reason?
I think we were eyeballing the funds for other purposes. One place we're looking to potentially allocate these funds is on the 101. So that is a future item that council should expect to see.
Okay, and so let me continue down that line. Then I have one other question about parkland acquisition. the funds that are in the red, the 3 funds that I think Scott showed, but also in the report, the ones that haven't been spent, what is the legal requirement now? We just have to identify a definitive plan for spending that in some shorter term? Or what is the financial requirement of, and I forget the AB, whatever?
So as we're looking at the 5-year findings, we're taking we go through the annual reports and we say this is what happened within the year. And then you look at all of them over 5 years to take a larger view and see if everything received in the 5 years was received, or is there anything potentially prior that was received and not spent.
Yeah.
So when we're looking at that, we see a few instances where there were monies that could potentially be older that were not spent within that time, and they've been committed to projects. So the money's come in, it's on a project like Santa Fe Drive that's under construction. So some of that comes out to timing issues. Then you have other scenarios such as maybe parks or open space where you have money that's coming in, but you don't have an adequate balance to serve that function. So then there are other requirements later on when you identify that you've accumulated enough to put it towards the type of project it's intended to, then you go down that route. So some of those funds, there's just not adequate balance to buy a park.
So what are the statutory requirements that this analysis is driving? In other words, if you come to the conclusion you have money that's older than 5 years and has not been spent, what does the city have to do in response to meet the statutory requirements of, and I forget the law? Do they just have to identify or give a reason for why it's delayed, or what? And which is what the report does. I see that, and it shows where it's committed to go. But I want to make sure with this report, are we meeting all the statutory requirements of reporting for these 5-year old funds?
So our analysis found that we are in compliance with the requirements where all of the funds had been spent, committed to things that are in construction, or we could not, or the third case was we have not identified that there's not enough money yet to put on a project. It's kind of one of those 3.
Okay, so then therefore we meet the
Then we meet
statutory
the-
requirements, and we know where all the money is earmarked or going,
Yeah.
and we have projects in the relative near term. Granted, construction timelines can be years. So, okay, great. I think that answers my question there. On page 20, there's the parkland acquisition expenditures for the last 5 years, and there were monies spent in 2018, 19, and 20, and you wouldn't happen to have the report for what those were used for? I know I usually try and get that one done during that kind of question done during my briefing, but sorry. I don't know if you remember it. If you do, that'd be great.
I think
know Olympus
that was
Park.
Olympus,
was
yeah.
part of that.
But those are the kind of expenditures, so, okay, cool.
So that's a scenario where you may have that ebb and flow where you're accumulating a balance over the years, then you're able to build the project like Olympus, which would be the acquisition, development, and different components of that. And then you'll have a lower balance, and that could grow over time.
I actually really appreciated this analysis and the results of this law, because I do like the idea the fees are being collected and have to be expended or earmarked in the time frame of the project that's occurring, rather than collecting them over decades and having a different generation enjoy while a whole generation went without. So I think it's a good system and a good review. So those are my questions. Thank you.
Yeah, and I remember the developer dedicated the land for Olympus Park, and it sat fallow for decade and a half, a really long time. And so it was quite a relief to finally get that under construction and built. Councilmember Lyons.
I don't know if it's easy enough to pull up page 12 of your staff report, or of the report, which the report is attached to the staff report. And maybe it's not it. Maybe it's not that important, but it kind of goes to Scott Campbell's question. I wanted to point something out. I know today we are just here to look at the report and see if it's a good accounting of this fund and to make a recommendation associated with that. But since we're talking about this, and since there was a question about what are we going to do there in the center of the spreadsheet, and you go down to the bottom, and it shows you at the bottom what's remaining in that fund at the end of the fiscal year, this last year, it shows there's only $109,113 left, and yet the fund is acquisition of open space. And one of the things we've always been challenged with is that that is not enough money to buy significant amount of open space. And so there are some challenges that I think this structure has inherently in it that we're finding we get a little frustrated with. So even though that's not specifically what we're here to talk about today, we're here to talk about how well this is demonstrated to meet the requirements of reporting. One of the things that came up in my discussion with staff about this is that this is 9 years old. Our structure and our requirements to ourselves on how we monitor this fund is 9 years old. And it's at the point where it needs to be redone. Many of the assumptions that we have had in this mitigation fee, not only how much we can charge developers, but also what are the impacts of development to our community? And then where's the connection with that, with the amount of fee, the mitigation fee that we collect from developers? And are we in the right place, or do we really need to look at that from a whole different perspective? It's 9 years later, and I kind of feel like I'm living in a whole different world financially now than I was 9 years ago. And so what staff's told me is, yes, the timing's right. We've initiated the activity of updating our requirements around this, and that'll come before us at another time. But the money we collect right now is sitting in these funds, and it's wonderful to have it as a pot of money. We're not going to turn down money, but I think in some ways our hands are a little bit tied from what we want to be able to do with this money to really make a difference to our community. So that was more of a statement, and I just wanted to use this spreadsheet to illustrate that you can't buy open space for $100,000 in our community. So I hope we'll be able to have the opportunity to do some rethinking on this as we evaluate how we're doing it. With that, I'd like to move to approve this report.
I'll second that. And I'll ask a couple of questions. If you turn to page 22 of the staff report, it's Fund 233, Traffic Mitigation, which to me is probably the most important one that we get from developers, because every project results in impacts to our already very crowded streets. I would love to be able to drill down on these reports so that we're on those. We've got the fund balance beginning of the year, and then there's fees collected. I'd love to know how much fee per project was collected and have it identified, and so that we can say, okay, X number of dollars for, the Vulcan apartments, and, so that we know, because I also know that the calculation of these fees comes at a point in the project where a lot of the public discussion has been finished. So the ability for the public to know that that project that is impacting their life, their neighborhood, contributed these funds to these funds. I also would look at that fees refunded and wonder why we would have refunded any traffic mitigation fees. But that to me, if there was any way to keep track of that in these reports, it sure would be beneficial, I think, in terms of transparency. So, I can see that with every one of those categories, because these impact fees are really important. And I think there are plenty of arguments that suggest that the fees that we collect are not adequate to address all of the impacts of the projects, but I get that we're limited by the law in terms of what we can charge developers. So I look forward to having that conversation about to true up our mitigation fees. So, okay, we have a motion and a second.
Motion carries unanimously. It takes us to item 10B.
Thank you. Moving on to item 10B, consideration of barriers to racial and ethnic equity in housing study findings and recommendations.
All right. Well, good evening, Mayor Kranz, Deputy Mayor Blackwell, and council members. My name is Joel Savecko, Associate Planner, and I'm here to present the Barriers to Racial and Ethnic Equity in Housing study. With me today is Patty Anders, Planning Manager, and Carrie Kushak, Development Services Director. The consultant will not be joining us today. So why conduct an equity study? These are HCD requirements from the housing element. So in June 2020, the city submitted the draft housing element to HCD, which identified that Encinitas is less racially and ethnically diverse in the surrounding region, and that disparities exist in lender approval rates by race. Staff did consultation with HCD over the summer of 2020 that resulted in a request to include a program to conduct a study on barriers for people of color wanting to move to Encinitas and include actions to remove those barriers. In August 2020, the city provided the revised housing element to HCD, including Program 3H to satisfy HCD's request. On August 27th, 2020, HCD submitted a letter requesting adding analysis of the underlying causes for Encinitas being dissimilar in racial ethnic makeup to the San Diego region and create access to opportunity based on the results of the analysis. And then on February 4th of 2021, the Planning Commission approved the housing element, including Program 3H. And on April 7th of the same year, the City Council approved the housing element with Program 3H. So here is a key excerpt from Housing Element Program 3H. To better understand the barriers specific to the city of Encinitas and how they may differ from the region, the city will conduct a study to identify any potential discriminatory land use and housing-related policies, inequitable community development practices, potential racial or ethnic biases in mortgage lending and rental housing, and other policies and practices that may create or contribute to barriers in access to housing opportunity in Encinitas, and which may explain why Encinitas' ethnic composition is dissimilar to that of the San Diego region. Now that we've established the background, let's dive deeper into the study. So here's a quick overview, introduction, purpose, and then we'll go through phases 1 and 2. So the purpose of the study was to better understand and address disparities within the Encinitas housing landscape. Here's an overview of the timeline. So the RFP was issued in September of 2021. The project was launched in January 2022. There was a lot of data collection and public outreach that concluded with the end of phase 1 in August of 2022. The study was revised and phase 2 was launched to prioritize the findings and recommendations of the study. And then in September of last year, we launched a survey to get feedback from the Encinitas community on the findings and recommendations. So here is phase one. So the consultant utilized an outcome-led equity approach, which included emphasizing the local context, a focus on the possible, and making findings accessible. So the primary research questions that drove the study are: one, why is the population of the city of Encinitas less racially and ethnically diverse than that of the region as a whole? And two, why are the historic and existing barriers disproportionately impacting access to safe, high-quality, affordable housing for current or prospective BIPOC residents of Encinitas? BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So going into the methodology, the consultant began with collecting demographic and economic data from the city, the county, SANDAG, the census, and the American Community Survey. There was background research on historic housing policies that may contribute to the current housing inequities. Then there was the first community survey that was in April to May of 2022 for Encinitas workers and residents. The consultant conducted 21 interviews with city officials, community-based organizations, and private sector stakeholders. And the consultant also conducted 5 focus groups with community members from the BIPOC community, the housing choice voucher recipients, school district officials, Spanish-speaking residents, and then a community forum for all Encinitas residents. Then we move into phase 2, and that began with development of the findings and recommendations based on the public input we received and the data collection. Then we went back out to the community with a survey to ask them to prioritize the findings and recommendations. And here we are now in the prioritization portion of phase 2. So I'm going to go through the findings of the study. So there's an overview there, and I'll go through these one by one. So finding 1, Encinitas housing market is less racially and economically diverse than that of the surrounding community. Low income and BIPOC residents are clustered in certain parts of the city. Finding 2, there are policies in place that create barriers to developing more multifamily units. And some of what we heard from the community is there's a need for larger units that are affordable to families with children. And as well as the AUP program, there's issues with that in that it may not offer enough of an incentive to combat the high costs of renovations required to reach the building permit standards. Finding 3, there's a shortage of affordable housing, and programs designed to promote affordability do not adequately serve community needs. The study uncovered the following barriers to accessing affordable housing with vouchers, and these included some of the key ones were the long wait list for receiving a voucher, the inability to find units that meet their needs, again, units that are large enough for low-income residents with families, and rents that exceed the ability to pay within the program standards. Finding 4, there's a limited amount of affordable housing in Encinitas, and the locations for affordable housing exacerbate existing inequities. And something that we heard from the community was that key community members like teachers, healthcare workers, and service industry workers find it difficult to secure affordable housing in Encinitas. Finding 5, limited public transit constrains affordable and accessible housing development, and reducing parking requirements and providing better transit not only provides more space for housing, but reduces traffic congestion. And finally, finding 6, private sector practices and incentives contribute to displacement. Rent eviction has allowed landlords to increase rent above California's limit on annual rent increases. And as well, along with renoviction, we have the issue of short-term rental housing, which reduces the available housing stock. All right, so the findings informed a set of 10 recommendations. I'm just going to go through these quickly. Number 1, implement education for city staff, policymakers, and the public about what racial equity means regarding the acquisition and development of affordable housing in Encinitas. 2, enact just cause eviction policies to protect tenants from no-fault evictions. 3, engage landlords in a proactive outreach campaign to provide information and dispel myths about the Housing Choice Voucher Program. 4, develop an outreach plan to increase tenants' knowledge of their rights. 5, expand the city's capacity to address fair housing complaints. 6, engage the San Diego Housing Commission regarding changes to the county's first-time homebuyer program. 7, consider transportation as a component of a comprehensive approach to community development planning. 8, convene an advisory collaborative of community leaders to solicit community knowledge to inform decision-making. 9, hire a citywide diversity, equity, inclusion coordinator. And 10, continue to fund the residential rehabilitation program. So we took these recommendations and findings back out to the community, and we received, we have some data here on what we learned. We have the race and ethnicity data, age group, gender identity, role in the community, and reasons for not living in Encinitas, usually either cost or location. So, community feedback on the findings. The top-ranked finding was number 3. There's a shortage of affordable housing, and programs designed to promote affordability do not adequately serve community needs. 52% agreed with that. And the lowest-ranked finding was number 2. There are policies in place that create barriers to developing more multifamily units. Numbers 5 and 6 were a bit polarizing, and there was a broad level of disagreement among survey respondents, as they were both top ranked for some and lowest ranked for others. And community feedback on the recommendations. So the top ranked recommendation was number 7, consider transportation as a component in a comprehensive approach to community development planning. Almost 50% agreed. And the lowest ranked recommendation was number 9, to hire a citywide DEI coordinator. So finally, council direction. Staff is seeking council direction on moving forward with development of a housing equity action plan and what, if any, recommendations to include. And this concludes staff's presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Let's hear from public speakers, please.
Okay. First 3 speakers, Natalie Satoon, followed by Rachel Graves with a time donation from Rhonda Graves, followed by Sheila Cameron with time donations from Dolores Welty and John Hutchins.
Hello, Natalie Satoon, Cardiff. Hello, Mayor Kranz and City Council. That you would prioritize this agenda item at the opening of the new council year 2024 is a reflection of your lopsided and misguided priorities that do not reflect the will of the constituents. After poring through the 91-page Opportunity Consulting Housing Equity Report, Study, and Survey with outrageous and highly biased allegations and misguided advice, I was stunned to see that the city attorney and the city manager have already approved yet another contract renewal number 3, although saved as number 2, in April 2023 through June of 2025. I totally object to this contract extension when the consultant's final report was dated September 2023. How can you extend their contract before their contracted work has been completed? I object to the Housing Equity Report, Study, and Survey findings. They are flawed and full of assumptions after obtaining study data from a mere 129 people out of our 63,000 population, some of whom do not live in Encinitas. I object to this council working with this company, the principal with a highly blemished and partisan hateful social media record, and all of your attempts to social engineer our town. Encinitas is already a welcome place, and the door is wide open for hardworking people who want to live in Encinitas and can afford to. This is a well-known fact. I object to the secretive agenda of yours, the total lack of transparency. Your plan is out in the open now. One, you're going to stage a vote tonight to approve this agenda item, staff recommendation, a study, an expense the voters never approved of from the start. Two, you're going to then vote to extend the contract after the contract has already been extended. Three, during all of this, you will totally ignore the public comments, written and oral, since A, your minds are already made up, and B, the contract is already extended to continue this disgusting work, waging war on Encinitas residents and property owners. And four, you will happily take Encinitas down yet another dangerous path in lockstep with your far-left progressive political party, totally discounting the desires of the majority of Encinitas. The voters. This is not leadership. The voters and residents have had enough of your premeditated and pre-planned charades. Who are you working for? Clearly not the Encinitas residents and taxpayers. Stop harming our city and spending taxpayer monies that you have not been given the authority to spend. Thank you.
I won't need my slides till like halfway through. Are you doing my slides? Yeah. Okay. I won't need them for a couple minutes. Hi, my name is Rachel. I'm here tonight to demand the equity study be discarded and the contract extension with Opportunity Consulting be rescinded. First, Opportunity Consulting did not visit Encinitas to even see the town before drawing their conclusions. And these findings aren't findings, they're opinions. Their presumptions are hearsay and, frankly, the same prejudiced presumptions they make in cities along the East Coast. And then they come here and compare Encinitas to Escondido and Vista, but not to Rancho Santa Fe, our neighbor. Second, what is a study? It's a detailed investigation or observation with unforeseen conclusions. A study is not a game plan by which you set up a result and then cherry pick observations to justify your end desires. Opportunity Consulting sent an email to staff asking, quote, what are the leadership team's goals for this equity study, unquote? And, quote, if the goals are realized, in what ways would the city of Encinitas be changed as a result, unquote? This is not a study at all. It's a political agenda. As part of this phony study, the consultants interviewed 21 hand-selected stakeholders. Who selected these so-called stakeholders and by what standards, and what do these people know? Good question. There were no standards, except for maybe one. I find it awfully suspicious that Mayor Kranz's campaign donors are overrepresented on this interview roster. Just by memory, it's about half of the people on that interview list. There was an article in the Coast News this week about cronyism on this council. This study seems to fit right in with the going theme. Remember, Tony, I helped you campaign when you ran on trust and transparency. When did that promise go up in smoke? Opportunity Consulting presents to us tonight the results of their so-called survey. They add a footnote that it is neither scientifically nor statistically significant. So what the heck are we doing with this study on our agenda? To be significant, this consultant would have needed upwards of 4,000 respondents, not just 100 or 200. I have a question for Kranz, Hinsey, and Lyons. Did you three know this study would be presented with insignificant data when you selected the company's $80,000 bid? And if you did, shame on you. And if you didn't, you need to throw it right in the trash and dismantle the contract extension with this company because, no pun intended, they got their opportunity. On a personal note, I'd like to describe my experience with the study. I attended the general workshop. At the beginning, the attendees were randomly split into subgroups to discuss topics. Immediately, I heard one attendee exclaim, "She's not supposed to be in our group." And another attendee confirmed it. The moderator then accommodated these controlling voices. It was clear to all of us that these voices had a pre-designed plan. This was not a study, this was a setup. The second group I attended was the BIPOC group, as I'm in an interracial marriage. There was another interracial couple in attendance, and that was it, just us. No matter how hard the moderator pushed to squeeze juicy stories of racism and discrimination in housing or education or other experiences, she could not. All she heard were positive stories of home ownership, raising children here, and living happily in Encinitas. So I'd like to know exactly where the positive success stories ended up in this so-called study. And how did they arrive at these negative findings about the BIPOC community having so much barrier? And on a last note, since the three of you already know about the owner of Opportunity Consulting, I'd like to share with council members Ehlers and Blackwell a little background on this company, Opportunity Consulting. You might ask why a DC-based company was hired to perform a study in Southern California. I asked the same question. There were two other bids accepted. One came in well below Opportunity Consulting, the other a similar dollar amount. Both were in Orange County based, and both were minority owned, familiar with the type of city that Encinitas is. Why weren't either of these chosen? Instead, we chose a company who never visited our city from Washington, D.C. Is it just a coincidence that Iris Bongill, owner of Opportunity Consulting, went to Arizona State University along with Molly Woods Drake and Nicole Lance, member and facilitator of the Equity Committee? I seriously doubt it. I'm going to now show you, please, a series of slides. Just hold off for a second. All of which will give you an insight into Iris Bongill, the owner of Opportunity Consulting. All of the quotes and posts were pulled directly from her personal Facebook page. They depict an absolute cesspool of discrimination and prejudice towards Republicans, white people, and black men who I live with. She makes derogatory statements, boldly boasts her bigotry, and proudly berates those whose skin color and political leanings she dislikes. While looking through, ask yourself, you can start now. Ask yourself if this, not so fast, oh, sorry. If this person, just one second, if this is a person who should be making negative judgments on the good people of Encinitas, ask yourself if she has a sane mind to be impartial and to remove her propagandized political activism to be fair to all citizens. I would first like you to view the first slide with the knowledge that this lady was fired from her job as superintendent of the Washington, D.C. Department of Labor. Did any of you know she was fired from that job? Is it possible her personal hatred for certain groups spilled over into her job there? Now you can go through these sick posts about Republicans. You can keep going. There's so many. It's dozens and dozens and dozens about white supremacy Republicans, white supremacy Republicans. Keep going. And we'll stop soon. First, you'll see over 4 heinous posts. As you can see, it's quite an obsession. Now you can stop. I need to keep going. Can I keep going for a couple of minutes?
No.
I can't.
Maybe somebody will donate time, I don't know.
Anyone want to donate some more time? Okay, thank you. Can you go back to? You'll see her comment on her page that Democrats are racist because the majority of white people are racist, period. And she likes this comment. She tells her minority friend, I wouldn't wait for white folks to thank you. And most disturbingly, 2 more. Her friend comments about 6F America's hateful obsession with black people. For those of you who don't know what 6F is, it's an abbreviation used to reference the most extreme level of whiteness possible, one that is staggeringly asinine in its appearance, privilege, and associated behaviors. And Iris Bongill likes this comment on her page. Here's a breath, and keep two forward. The last 3 posts hit the hardest as she attacks black conservative men, a swiftly expanding demographic, simply because they vote differently than she wants them. Here, Iris Bongill accuses black men who vote Republican of internalized white supremacy and toxic masculinity. She makes the staggering, foolish claim that idolization of power, wealth, hegemonic masculinity among too many black men is too real. And then she spews more stupidity in her next post, claiming that black men have bartered and sold their most valuable possession. Lastly, she accuses a highly accomplished and highly respected black Heisman Trophy winner, graduate of a university in Georgia, of being in the sunken place, referencing a movie where black victims were put into trance-like states as their bodies were taken over by whites. In short, it's claiming that he's so oppressed he can't make proper decisions for himself. Insulting, berating, and belittling black men is not acceptable in my household. It's not acceptable in my city, and it shouldn't be acceptable to any of you. Shame on the city for hiring this lady to conduct, of all things, an equity study. I suggest you trash this study and this contract.
Next speaker is Sheila Cameron with 2 time donations, Dolores Welty and John Hutchins, followed by Dennis Caden and then Teresa Beauchamp.
Good evening, Sheila Cameron, Leucadia. Good evening, Mayor and council members. As a former human resources manager working for a company with 1,200 employees, 32 departments, and 5 unions, I have a working familiarity with the federal government's Fair Housing Act that offers protection for race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, disability. The California Fair Employment Housing Act offers even more protections in 11 areas. These acts eliminate discrimination in housing. I don't understand why you're putting in another layer of government that duplicates what we already have as established laws. Diversity, equity, and inclusion seems to be the latest byword sweeping the country that actually has nothing to do and nothing new to offer except reverse discrimination, which you heard tonight. People behind this movement denigrate whites, consider us privileged and apparently the enemy. I just want to say that my husband and I, when we bought here, and we bought our house in 79, we came here in 74, sold our first place, bought in 79, our interest rate was 18%. And if you think that was easy, it wasn't. We had to struggle to pay for everything, work hard, we've done it. But people saying that we whites who have worked so hard are privileged, et cetera, here really burns me. I couldn't afford to buy my house now for what it's worth. And if I hadn't gotten here 50 years ago, I wouldn't be here at all. But the thing is, if you're willing to work for it, come in here and work your buns off, you can live here. But if you don't, then walk away. People behind this movement, as I said, denigrate whites, consider us privileged and apparently the enemy. Martin Luther King, one of my heroes whose birthday was yesterday, said what matters was a person's character. This DEI proposal flies in the face of that. You plan to add a new staff position with no information offered to the citizens as to the actual duties or costs to the taxpayers. This person gets a salary, benefits, an office, computer, an assistant, none of which is even hinted at in this 90-page report. To do what exactly? I was in human resources. This would have been part of my job. Your human resources manager's job. Why isn't he or she doing that? It appears you've been working on this a while. So it is a done deal? Well, too bad. I wonder why you're wasting all our time. You list Proposition A, the Right to Vote initiative, as a barrier to DEI. How can giving your constituents the right to vote on massive housing projects that affect our lives be a barrier? How does staff determine that Prop A is a barrier? Where is the data that proves this statement? Be careful, Council. You tried to sue your constituents over our right to vote before, and your citizens sued you, and you lost the lawsuit. That says it all, don't you think? Frankly, the greatest barrier to DEI in this city is you. The current and former mayors and councils, in Measure U in 2016, you set the very low and affordable housing percentage at 10%. During the meetings leading up to Measure U, we citizens asked for 25%, showing clearly that developers could still make a profit. But Mayor Blakespear and her council rejected 25% in favor of helping developers' profits. In 2021, knowing you had a shortfall in all levels of affordable housing, you went to 15%. This, when your own consultants advised you, you could go to 25% and more closely meet the state's mandated affordable goals. You have set yourselves up as the guardians of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but you're the ones who have created the barrier, not Proposition A. Having an opportunity to live in Encinitas is possible. Make sure you, our elected officials, don't stand in the way of that. A second barrier is simply economic. The standard that has been set for people to qualify for affordable units by the state and the city is a financial one. Or in your push for DEI, do you plan using our tax dollars to subsidize housing? You cannot skew that economic barrier. It's real. A last point, and this was mentioned, but it bothered me too. On page 5, it states, neither of the two surveys were intended to be statistically or scientifically significant. Nice alliteration. They are not representative samples of the Encinitas population, so why is this council meeting on how to use a study that by the consultant's own admission is not valid? Look at the letters and comments you received on this issue. There's a lot of them. I didn't see any in favor. Please do not vote to support this unneeded, divisive DEI proposal. It isn't fair. There's a small group of people saying we're prejudiced. They came from the East Coast. They don't like it here. They can go back. I came from the East Coast. I like it here. I'm staying, and I'm going to fight you on this kind of thing. Thank you.
Well, good evening, Council and Mayor Kranz. Thanks for being here. There's no need for Encinitas to consider or actually hire a DEI officer or the recommendations from this consulting firm. The Fair Housing Act prohibits discriminatory conduct, also known as steering, such as refusing to rent, sell, negotiate, or otherwise make housing unavailable to individuals based on race, color, religion, gender identity, and familial status, meaning number of children or single mother. Over many years, I myself has coached and assisted coaching several youth sports in Encinitas. During those times, as well as while raising my children, I have not experienced racism in Encinitas. I am offended that Encinitas taxpayers and voters are being somehow accused of racism because we don't fit in with a neighboring community. Like Solana Beach, Carlsbad? I don't think we're much different. It's not true. The study is not true. We do not need or want a DEI officer or anything the committee has recommended. This appears as a woke agenda item, and Encinitas taxpayers and voters should not be targeted as victimizing anyone based on race or where one originates from. Encinitas is not racist. Where have low-income buyers been told no? Aha! There have been instances where the city approved the purchase of low-income housing in O'Livenhain and Cardiff by the Sea, not to qualified low-income individuals and their families, but allowed the sale for for-profit companies and more recently 40 units to a wealthy nonprofit corporation. Consider making a revised housing policy where qualified low-income persons are prioritized to purchase their dream home and eliminate them from having to compete with the big money businesses for their big money profits. There's an easy fix. You can easily raise the number of low-income units you require on R30 projects. We've always asked for that. The city voters have some, well, do that, please. The Encinitas voters and taxpayers are not racist. You need to defend us from being targeted and accused of being racist from this outside consulting company. Why are the consultants and staff even considering Encinitas simply because of our demographics? The study is flawed and biased. Washington, D.C., The best way I've ever heard Washington, D.C. described is 68 square miles surrounded by reality. Thank you.
Next speaker is Teresa Beauchamp, followed by Bob Ayers, Kathleen Stiven, and then James Stiven.
Honorable Mayor, Deputy Mayor Blackwell, and council members Hinsey, Lyons, and Ehlers. High praise to Joel and his team for the work involved in this presentation. I've been a homeowner in Encinitas for 35 years and am saddened when my dear hardworking Latinx friends and community leaders are forced to leave our city due to housing costs. The loss of these families weakens our community character. I advocated for this study in order to learn how to remove obstacles to housing opportunities for our community pillars who support every aspect of our city's functioning. Our progressive city council members are to be commended for more low-income housing opportunities by increasing the inclusionary rate and implementation of a housing element. From 2013 to 2020, the pre-housing element period, the demand for low-income housing in Encinitas was 1,049, and only 92 were built in that period of time. Post-implementation of housing element, as of March 2023, 426 affordable units had been approved. Thank you all for your support of that. For the path forward, I will focus on recommendation 8. It is important that the city identify a point person employed by the developer or builder for each housing element site. We need someone who understands the wait list and application process and is willing to educate potential tenants. I have a close friend who is a community leader and works full-time in Encinitas who wishes to live where she works. I'm helping her navigate through the wait list process for an affordable unit in a housing element site. Despite educating myself on affordable housing over the past few years, I am still confused about the next steps to ensure that she is on the correct wait list. The initial developer referred us to the builder. The builder cannot advise about affordable housing opportunities because those units will be sold to an affordable housing specialist. This process feels impossible to monitor for a working person, especially one with young children to care for. It would be helpful to have a bilingual city housing navigator to support applicants through the specific process for each development. Additionally, our city needs to provide consistent translation support for our Spanish-speaking community members. Finally, I recommend the city organize workshops to educate affordable housing candidates with the application process. It is a steep learning curve. Thank you for your efforts to make our community stronger.
Bob Ayers. I grew up and still live in Encinitas. I want to live in a city that is fair and diverse and just. That's the city I want to live in. There are barriers here. It's so easy to see that there are barriers because all of my homeowning neighbors, they're wealthy, they're rich, and almost all of them are white. There are historical barriers that exist. This report helps us understand how we get here. That's important. It also gives us some tools for progress. Progress is important when solutions are not easy. Thank you for the progress you've already made. We have a housing element. Encinitas is mostly in compliance with RENA, I think. We are not currently in any costly losing lawsuits with the state. Low-income housing is being built. You are much better educating our citizens than in the past about how complex these issues are. We are closer than ever to having a 100% affordable project. You've given us a partnership with the city of Vista for a shelter. You're working with our other neighbors, the county and the state on this as a regional issue. Thank you. We are making progress. There are clearly folks in Encinitas who see any change to housing as a direct threat to their comfortable way of life. Some people loudly discount the equity component of housing, but it is a vital one. You are our city's leaders. You know that inclusion, equity, and diversity are three of the most beautiful words in the English language. They are the cornerstone of our democratic principles. These principles are not a threat. They are a pathway to solutions for so many people who have fallen behind economically. Your application of their meaning shows Encinitas that you are making progress toward solutions to a challenging task. This report has some low-hanging fruit. Thank you for picking as much of it as you can, as much as you think we can all carry together.
Good evening, Mayor Kranz and esteemed members of the City Council. I am here tonight to just thank you for this report. We need the education, and you are helping us be educated so that when we go to try to get housing for all people, we will know what we're talking about. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Kranz and City Council members. I'm Jim Stiven, longtime resident of the City of Encinitas. First of all, I want to thank you for commissioning the study, and I applaud the 10 recommendations that are set forth within this study. The study on barriers to racial equity in housing correctly points out that there are a variety of historical and present conditions that have contributed to the striking inequity which exists today in housing in the city of Encinitas. These include historic redlining, discriminatory lending practices, and biases existing in the actions of many homeowners and landlords. These historical factors are exacerbated by the income inequality which persists today between the white population and the BIPOC population, and because of the extreme high market prices for both buying and renting homes in the city of Encinitas. Identifying and implementing solutions cannot be left to the private sector. It is the job of the city, acting through its staff and elected representatives. It will take creative thinking and courage to reach reasonable goals of equity in housing in this city. Let me state that a reasonable place to start is to approve a 100% affordable housing development in the city of Encinitas on city-owned property. Community input will be needed and welcome, but you should not shy away from your commitment to build a 100% affordable development here in this city. And you must also, in your setting out for this development, set forth restrictions that would require a reasonable allocation of new units in such a development to be spread between very low, and moderate income levels. Only by requiring these restrictions can the city ensure that there will be adequate income and wealth diversity amongst the residents of such a project. And by using vacant city-owned property in Encinitas, such a project would have the added benefit of allowing low-income earners, like our medical technicians, school teachers, and service providers, to live in an area of the city otherwise off limits to them. I urge you to approve this report and move forward with any and all projects which could achieve these goals and alleviate inequities spelled out in this report. Thank you.
That does conclude public comments, and then we do have Dolores Welty registering opposition to the recommended action, but is not speaking.
Okay, thank you all. And I think at this point, before we get into our deliberations, we'll take a 10-minute break. Okay, if you take your seats, I appreciate it. We will get on with discussion about this item. One of the things that I would like to do is respond quickly to the question of this secretiveness and the lack of transparency that was asserted, and be clear that the city's website has our housing element on it, and program 3H is in there, and it has all the details. But one of the things that it has also here is a time frame, and it says we are to conduct a study by December 31st of 2022, and we are to implement policies and programs by December 31st, 2023. So we are behind schedule, and that is why we are hearing it now. It is a commitment that we made to HCD, and technically they could, I suspect they could say we were out of compliance with our housing element and decertify, and then we'd have all sorts of terrible things that would follow. I doubt that they're going to jump on us for it, but I just want you all to know that it isn't some sort of effort to circumvent the people of the community here. This has been part of our public policy since adoption of the housing element in 2021. So the other issue that came up had to do with the contract for Opportunity Consulting, and I wonder if the city manager could please speak to the issues related to the contracts that were raised tonight.
Sure. I did want to announce to the council that actually we will not be doing an extension of this contract. The consultant resigned from the project today. So we will, there was a second piece having to do with the action plan, and so staff will regroup and determine whether or not they, it's something that they can do internally or if we will seek another consultant. Just wanted to make sure you were aware.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that information. I think clear the public does as well. Councilmember Lyons.
Thank you, Mayor Kranz. Let me tee this up with a few thoughts. First, I would like to say that no one wants to feel denigrated, and I feel as though I just feel sorry and sad if we have, in the process of this work, made anyone feel denigrated. I think we try to lift people up, and we want to be positive and move forward in a positive way. I wanted to start with that. I also wanted to make a statement about one thing that I've learned by researching and doing some training about housing and affordability is that it's hard to understand where the barriers are unless you've experienced them yourself. So that's a tricky thing. So it's hard to make transparent those barriers. And so what we're trying to do here is a difficult thing, to make something transparent that's hard to see unless we've experienced it ourselves. What I'd like to start with is a kind of an umbrella statement, and then highlight what I think is good and what I would be in favor of recommending. The umbrella statement for me is that I want to focus on housing, and I want to focus on reducing barriers to housing. And that was my understanding of what we were going to be doing here. So I know there's some other things that have been brought up, like a DEI person, staff member, or specialist. To me, that's outside of the range of what we need to be focused on right here. So to highlight even further where we need to focus, in my view, on building in less barriers or reducing barriers to housing, I want to focus on three things. This study didn't necessarily focus on these three, but I want to say them as a way of making sure we don't forget about some things that are important about housing. And the first thing is that first we need to protect the affordable housing we have. We have naturally affordable housing. What can easily happen in our community is that our naturally affordable housing can become displaced and our people become displaced. And a lot of times when we talk about housing, we think of barriers to attaining affordable housing, and that has merit. I'm not saying it doesn't, but I don't want to forget about providing our residents with the opportunities to remain in their currently naturally affordable housing. I brought this up in the past, and I like to kind of use the mobile home example of naturally affordable, because I think we all think in terms of, yeah, that makes sense, I can see that. And the vulnerabilities associated with whether the people who are currently living in these affordable housings will be displaced, I think is a bigger threat than most anything we're talking about here today. I would like to then say the second priority after protection is preservation, and that is preservation of our communities to be stable, to make sure that the rents can be as stable as possible, that there's, just to continue to create stability for those people who are already here. And then the third is production of affordable housing. And I'm totally aligned with Jim in what he says, that my top priority, and I've been very clear about it, is for the city to play an important role in providing 100% affordable housing on public city-owned land. Those are my priorities. I wanted to use this opportunity to say that. There are some, well, first of all, I want to say many of these things on this list of 10 recommendations we are already doing, although we might be calling it something else. So I would like to see if between staff and my council members, and if there's interest in this, that we kind of connect the dots between, yeah, we're already doing this, and perhaps we're doing a little bit of this, and perhaps maybe we want to do more of it. And that to me is the lower hanging fruit. If there's something novel that's we need to consider that we haven't already started to do, then I would be open to that too. But in regards to what we're already doing, we already have recommendation number 3, which is the housing choice voucher, the HCV. It's talked about in the report. This to me is a valuable tool for people to enter into affordable housing. However, in itself, sometimes it can feel like a barrier. And I want to point out what some speakers have said, in that it's hard to navigate. It's hard to figure out, okay, well, you've got a voucher for this much money, and so that's wonderful. And so where can you find that housing, and how can you be eligible for it? And I think that that's an area where we could look at where the barriers are to the individuals who are trying to use that program to connect them to more, to successfully connect them with affordable housing. I believe that when we talk about expanding city capacity, and that's recommendation number 5, I see that we have hired a housing solution manager who's really making a lot of good moves and creating a lot of success for connecting people, primarily focused on those who are homeless, with permanent housing solutions or temporary shelter. A little bit different lens. It's not like we want to add more to his plate, but I think we perhaps maybe want to look at how can we expand our own city capacity to focus on helping people navigate through the programs we already have and can improve on. And I think that we're already also connected in with the residential rehabilitation program. I'm sorry, I didn't quite write that correctly. It's recommendation number 10, continue to fund the residential rehabilitation program. That has a lot of merit to me to directly improve our affordable housing. So I'll tee it up with those specific recommendations that I feel I clearly can support, and I would just want to kind of wrap it up by saying hiring a DEI coordinator seems too broad and not focused enough on what we're trying to achieve right here, so I would have to say I wouldn't be in favor of that. Thank you.
Councilmember Hensy.
Thank you. Yeah, I think our discussions around equity, especially as it relates to housing, they're always a really hot button, controversial issue, and it's hard for us to have those conversations, but I think it's really worthwhile for us to have those conversations. And even though this study was a requirement as part of the housing element, it was supported by the Equity Committee to really do a good job at trying to bring in the voices to City Hall that are often marginalized. So, through the grapevine, we often hear stories of displacement. We often hear stories of seniors who have been on our waiting list for affordable housing in this community for 10 years and never find that housing. And so this was an opportunity for us to study in a way what stories are missing from the good news stories that do make it to City Hall. And those of us in this room who are fortunate enough to have stable housing here in our community. So to me, this was a really important use of our time, and especially to have our staff take a look at the results of the study, see what we're already doing and how we can do better is important. And as my colleague said, it's painful when we hear that there are people in our community who are hurt by certain findings of the study, making the assumption that the study's saying they're individuals who are racist and that's why these things happen, when in fact what I took away from the study was that there are systems in place, historical systems in place, and there's a need for Encinitas to understand what those systems are and overcome them, and to be introspective. So this was an important opportunity for us to be introspective as a community. I always think about my own story in Encinitas, getting to be a third-generation resident, now raising my daughter as a fourth-generation resident. That was only possible because both of my grandparents, who were educators, received the GI Bill and were able to achieve homeownership, and that homeownership has carried through for my family. And so many other vets from World War II who were people of color, who weren't white, were not eligible to receive that GI Bill. And so there was a whole segment of our society who was left out of getting a foothold into the generation of wealth. So I like to see that that's also reflected in these charts, this gap of wealth generation over the generations that's gotten bigger and bigger. And I think just in my own time here in Encinitas, I've seen the community around me become less racially diverse. Having started kindergarten with so many people who spoke no English when they came to school, to now looking at my same school where I hope my daughter will go, to having mostly English speakers there. So we have to recognize those changes, and I think if we really care about the character of our community, we're gonna be making an effort to hold on to that diversity and create more foothold for it where possible. So I appreciate the recommendations, and they were so well articulated by you, Joy, in the 3 tenets of protection, preservation, production. I'm right in alignment with you. A lot of what you said I agree with as well and have here in my notes. We've made so much progress in the area of housing with I still call you the new city manager, but now you've been here for several years. And we've really been able to fund positions to make meaningful progress on reducing homelessness in our community, understanding where we're falling short, and even having folks that are really motivated towards wanting to see our 100% affordable project on vacant city land become a reality. So I, like Joy, think that having a DEI officer isn't the right fit for our city resources. I think that person would find themselves siloed. And I think also maybe a target for some of the vitriol that our consultant received, and that concerns me, that we would be singling out somebody and setting them up to fail. So I'd rather see those resources directed in the ways that Ms. Beauchamp spoke about, a bilingual housing navigator. I've had a few friends' parents who are seniors, and they're looking at becoming homeless because of rent evictions and just a lot of the problems that were identified. And so I think having somebody really guide them through the process of, am I on the right list for affordable housing? What could I qualify if not for this grant, something different? And letting our city staff know, if the list is so long we don't even have room for people to wait on it, how else can we support those folks? So I think once we pivoted towards being a city that wants to have a housing element, wants to be in compliance with state law, accepts our responsibility as other cities have to allow for meaningful production of housing, We've seen ourselves become the recipient of more state grant funds to support those goals. So if we need more staff power to figure out how to attract that money, how to work in partnership with the county to increase, as Joy said, programs that might help protect our seniors in place, I think that would be a really valuable use of our resources. Again, organizing workshops for affordable housing candidates, I love that idea. I think that oftentimes people don't even know that they're eligible for affordable housing until they see how big the wealth gap is in Encinitas. And so there was one other thing I wanted to say. As Bobby Ayers mentioned, a lot of this is low-hanging fruit. So if we do have a waiting list for people that need to file complaints for fair housing, we shouldn't be letting people go by just because we expended our funding for that. We should be able to respond to every complaint made in the city. And I think that concludes my comments for now. Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Ehlers.
Yeah, so I want to go back to the purpose of the study and how it was conducted. The title is The Barrier to Racial and Ethnic Equity in Housing Study. So that's the box I'm going to speak in. I'd like to start with a statement of page 2, a quote, which I thought was a very good statement of the purpose. And it's, quote, in accordance with the Fair Housing Act, the city acknowledges the importance of equitable access, repeat, equitable access to housing for all residents regardless of race, color, national origin, religion, sex, including gender identity and sexual orientation, familial status, or disability. I thought that's a great statement. I mean, it's straight out of the Federal Housing Act, right? Yeah, that's where it should be, and it belongs there, and we support it 100%. I think we can all agree that that's what we should be looking, the lens we should be looking at this. Unfortunately, I was very disappointed with the report and how it responded to that and the amount of information it presented and the conclusions it jumped to. I immediately thought, this is such a heuristic argument, and I'm going, well, am I using that word correctly? And I was. It is a, quote, speculative, non-rigorous argument that relies on analogy or intuition and doesn't necessarily come to the right conclusion. And that's what I saw all through this. So I'm gonna be a little different. I'm gonna go into some specifics about, where's the evidence? And the first one, of course, the one that probably jumps out first to me was Prop A is a barrier. Wow. Where's the evidence? Prop A has only been in place since 2013. Are we saying, as a result of this report, that we didn't have that bias before 2013? Because that's what I'm reading. That's what this implies. There's zero evidence about what barrier we had before Prop A, after Prop A, and whether that bias has changed one bit, and it has not. This is not data-driven decision-making. Let's talk about the report claims that the BIPOC population is concentrated, and I love this, bounded by I-5 and El Camino Real. Well, that's well over a third of the city. But paradoxically, later, it talks about how homogeneously white we are. And I'm trying to figure out, again, it had one good graphic in there, and if you look, even Olevinine had some of the darker shades, the medium shades, not the darkest shades for showing BIPOC concentration. So I don't think the data in the report even supported the conclusion, and I was disappointed with it. I think some of the claims that this was a conclusion, looking for a report with a conclusion and trying to fill it in. If there are illegal behavior, practices going on, violating the Fair Housing Act, where are they listed in here? Not even anecdotes, not even anonymized anecdotes of, we've had this many reports of people being denied. The data about lending practices was pretty broad, and I'm not sure you can necessarily jump to the conclusions. You actually have to look at the data a little more deeply, understand if there were other reasons other than race. In other words, if we had done something a little more statistically valid, it would have looked and taken other factors out and shown that it was race that was the primary driver for denial. And even the report itself, quote, says, while rigorous, the study acknowledges inherent limitations due to the data availability and the complexity of assessing the multifaceted social issues. And it says it is not that rigorous. So with that, I was very disappointed with the overall thing. I will stop there and come back to the specific recommendations in another salvo. In general, I agree with the comment about I don't think we need a DEI coordinator. I don't think that is what tonight's discussion is about anyways. And I have some of the recommendations, and I'll go through them as we go through a little more deliberation. I think some we are already doing. I agree with a lot of the comments you made, and some I can't support at all. So we'll come back and I'll yield.
Deputy Mayor Blackwell.
Yes, thank you. I don't know if I really feel like debating whether this is a worthy study or not. I read it, like all of you, and I did think there were some things that were valuable, including the list of recommendations for us to consider as policymakers, as stewards of the city. There's a statement in the introduction of the study that is backed up with source material that says, diverse neighborhoods are associated with stronger economic indicators, including increased job opportunities and higher levels of home ownership. Studies provide strong evidence of positive relationship between housing quality and stability and educational outcomes at all levels. And then I think about the data, and HCD asked us to dig into this, right? It required us to dig into it, which is our city is racially and ethnically different than some of the surrounding cities. I want to know, why is that? And I think that's a really fair question for us to ask. So the study did make that attempt to dig into it. I also, in my experience, and I led diversity, equity, inclusion for several years, and my experience showed that the only way to really increase diversity is to be very purposeful, is to have some policies in place that are going to make a difference. And so that takes me to the recommendation list, and I do agree with how Councilmember Lyons framed it up as, let's keep that focus on housing and the barriers to housing in our city. And I think there's a good list here of 10. I'll get to them in more specific. I think it's best to prioritize them and consider the input we did get in the survey, which was to say recommendations 6 and 7 and 8 were the ones most agreed with. I think we should also look at that list and say, let's continue what we're already doing and kind of call that out, sort of a start, stop, continue. But in this case, start and continue. And in some cases, we're doing quite a bit. So that's good to acknowledge. Like my colleagues, I don't agree with a DEI coordinator at this time. I'll tell you why. I think I've seen too many instances where companies or cities put that in place as the person who's going to solve the problem, and that's an impossible job. Until I had the benefit of working at a company that had a really good view of what they wanted to do, and they needed someone to drive that change across many parts of the company and embed it in how the company operates. So until the city gets more clarity on what we want to do and who really the owners of it are, I think it would be a bit reckless to put one person in charge of it. So I think we should defer that. Maybe at some point it makes sense, but I don't agree with it now. But in sum, I feel I do feel sad that some people felt really offended by the study. And that we did not probably have enough information about the methodology used. But I think it's hard to walk away from those recommendations. They're pretty common sense, and I do think it would help us. And I think we should all ask ourselves again that question, why are we different? What is getting in our way? So I'll yield.
Thank you. And I also regret the discussion has kind of been sidetracked by the issue of DEI. That is a hot button issue that the not just this community nor just this state, but the country is really fighting over in kind of strange ways. It's really just people talking past each other. And the reality is there are some DEI programs that I think have missed the mark and therefore set up valid criticisms. But I have not studied all of the DEI programs, so I clearly am not qualified to speak to that. But what I can speak to is what Mr. Ayers has brought up, which is the fact that, you know, I want Encinitas to be diverse and have an abundance of equity and be inclusive. And it's just been, that was the way I was raised. And I do think that this is an issue that, like the issue of homelessness and some of the, there are some issues that trigger in each individual a certain response, and you know, it's not always easy to understand where that came from. But for me, I just you know, reflect a lot on the fact that I was blessed with the opportunity to grow up in the city. In fact, Bobby and I were classmates in kindergarten at Ocean Knoll School. We lived down the street from one another, played quite a bit together. Also graduated from San Diego High School in 1977 together. And he was a soccer player, I was a football player, and strangely enough, the football team had 0 black people on it. I think in the graduating class that we were in, there was 1 black person. And so, you know, Encinitas has always been very white. The people of color that were here were generally Mexican Americans and very actively involved in the floricultural industry that made this city famous. And, you know, I felt really blessed to have them as friends as well. And it taught me a lot about what it's like as a Caucasian to deal with people versus people of color and the encounters that they oftentimes experience that are not very pleasant. I did go on to Palomar, played football with some folks that had grown up in Compton. I served in the military, which is a very integrated government, you know, program, whatever you want to call it. And I just know that it's really important to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. And I try to do that in this job and everything that I've been involved in. When it comes to this report, I too am disappointed that it got you know, we got some people fairly upset. I tried to focus on the recommendations, the findings and the recommendations. I would point out to Councilmember Ehlers that while the finding says, mentions Prop A, what it really says is there are policies in place that create barriers to developing more multifamily units. And multifamily units are the units that allow people with lower income to be able to live in our city. And frankly, this city was incorporated based upon the cry that we're not going to let the apartment dwellers be a part of our community. Our general plan put in the vote prior to Prop A. It put in the requirement that upzoning would take a vote of the people. It is a tool that's used to keep development like multifamily projects from happening. And it was fairly successful. It was fairly successful, and we got a lot of grief from the Housing and Community Development Department over the years because we had these right to vote in our general plan. It was changed to allow for a supermajority to approve an upzone, and that's what was used to approve 2 of our housing elements. And so, or excuse me, 2 of our specific plans, the downtown and the Leucadia specific plan. So the voting aspect of upzoning, there's no question that it limited the number of multifamily units in our community. So we are seeing a change. We've got some projects. It was court ordered to adopt a housing element that included 15 parcels that allowed for R30 development. And so those are underway, and that was, I think it was Teresa who mentioned the numbers that we are seeing finally from that particular approval. The DEI recommendation to have a DEI coordinator is something that I do not support. Novardo sent in a recommendation to adopt 2 through 7, and I tend to agree with that. I think that Teresa's point about having somebody coordinate, I frankly would rather have somebody on staff work with the developers so that people that are interested in these projects don't have to go from one project to the next or search for this website or that website, that we have a way to coordinate all the information in one location so that people that are trying to participate in these programs where an opportunity for an affordable house, a home is available, that they can use the city's website for that. So with that, I will move on to second round of comments, starting with Councilmember Ehlers. I assume you didn't have a second.
I thought Ellison was going next.
Yeah, I forgot to take her name off.
Okay. So now I'll get down into the recommendations next. On recommendation 1, I think I'd have to see what form it took before I could go with it. If it goes forward, we'll have that discussion. Recommendation 2 on just cause eviction, that is a slippery slope, and I'm fundamentally believe that is a state law that should be followed, and I'd rather see it there. If we put in if we increase locally only, and we're not that large of a city, we're not a Santa Monica with rent control and whatnot, but we could run the risk of driving investment in multifamily housing out. We basically lower the value of the multifamily housing as we put more and more limitations on rents, and we'll drive down the supply a different way. So I fundamentally would be against 2. On going to 3, 4, 5, 6, I think most of those we're either already doing or I would support them, yes. 7, fundamental problem for me is that, again, this is a regional issue more than it is, it's a San Diego County issue. Transportation, if you look at, got a great study from SCAG, which is the Southern California area government, so it'd be LA Orange County, much like our Sandag, but very similar demographics. And they showed from 2000 to 2015 that ridership has steadily declined in mass transit, steadily declined over a 15-year period, very similar demographics. We've seen the same thing here. They peeled the onion. They did a really good job. They said, hey, why? They looked at car ownership. Now, we keep taking away parking, and I keep voting against taking away parking. The car ownership went from 1.7 to 2.4 cars per household over that same 15-year period. Now, obviously, the pandemic even lowered ridership more. I don't know what it did with car ownership, but the fundamental thing here is that car ownership has actually gotten more affordable because cars have gotten quite reliable, and you can have a 20-year-old car. If you go back to the 1990s, your car didn't last 20 years. They do now. The third thing, they peeled it just a little further. I thought this was great. It's a great study if you haven't seen it. They said, who bought the cars? It turns out lower income. Lower income are exercising their free right to buy a car and go with the convenience. I'm going to steal what Sheila used to say all the time about trains. Trains go from where you aren't to where you don't want to go. So you got the front, you got to get to the train, you ride the train, and then you got to get off the train and get to where you really want to go. And people, the study talked about lower income actually had access to much higher paying jobs with cars than they did with mass transit. Think about that. And so what we're trying to do is fight that trend. So I do not support item 7 in setting up a citywide transportation method. I think it's antiquated and wrong. And I think if we're going to decarbonize, it's not going to be through mass transit, not taking a multi-ton bus around, even if it's electric. It's going to be more and more people getting electric cars or electric bikes. But even the bikes will never completely replace, they won't even significantly replace the cars. So I don't support 7. 8, I don't support setting up yet another commission. I think this is the commission. The buck stops up here. We should be the ones talking, and if we don't do the right thing according to the voters of the people, then that's your job to get rid of us. and that's what elections are for. 8, 9, we already talked about, and 10, I think I would put yes, that continue the residential, of course. This is something we're already doing. So hopefully that gives my input, and I think it's not too far off what you guys are saying.
I guess one question I'd have for you, recommendation 7, consider transportation as a component of a comprehensive approach to community development planning. I don't see anything in there that says we should have our own bus system, but I do think it speaks to the notion of we locate multifamily housing somewhere along the route where bus 304 or 309 runs. So I'm not sure, do you think that's a bad idea to look to?
I'll tell you, this is one more example of why I didn't like this report, because it cited the Twin Cities in Minnesota, and it talked about inner city versus suburbs. And so they're talking at a scale 100 times the size of us, maybe 20 times, I don't know, much, much larger. They're talking about, and I forget the term they use. They use a term of centers or something like that. And they were talking about an inner city core center and a suburb center, and connecting them was important with transit. And we don't have that. Again, I'll go back to, we have a very homogeneous makeup of our city, of course, economically too. I think it doesn't matter a whole lot whether you're in which section. You have a strata of people, not very many on the low side of the economic, of course, because it is very expensive to live here. But the bottom line is, I just don't think that what they described in the report is applicable to us. If we're talking about locating our multifamily units in existing transit corridors, yeah, that makes sense. That makes certain sense. But the way they described it, it was completely off base. It was as though they had not visited Encinitas.
Okay, great, thank you. Deputy Councilmember Lyons.
Yes, thank you. As far as number 7 with the transportation component, I do think affordable housing and transportation are connected. You've heard the expression, I think if I remember correctly, it has to do with you just drive until you can afford. I don't think that is so much specifically what we have control over, but I think we know that a lot of people who live here in Encinitas, who work here in Encinitas don't live here. They live in other communities that are more affordable around us. And I think that's what it might be getting at, where there is a connection between affordability and transportation. Now, as that relates to us, I agree with Mayor Kranz that this is more where to locate affordable housing should have the component of how can people who live in that affordable housing circulate and get to where they need to go. So it should be around existing transportation corridors. So I don't see it as more complex than that for us as far as what we have oversight over here in Encinitas. However, I did also note the Twin Cities and laughed as well. But I do want to point out one other thing that I'm not in agreement yet with, and that is item number 2, recommendation number 2, which is the just cause eviction. And I want to communicate that the state already has laws in place that require that. And I don't feel as though we need additional laws that would help us any more than what the state's already got. We already have the Tenant Protection Act of 2019, which handles that evictions need to have just cause. I'm not in favor of saying that we need to do something in addition to that. I think that's a powerful law, and it's not relevant to what we need to do as we go forward here as a city. So I will put forward, let me see where we stand. I will just put forward at this point, I won't make a motion yet, but that items 3, which are housing choice vouchers, is a program we should continue and support and look for other ways to continue. Item 4, we should continue. It has to do with education and tenant rights. Item 5, expanding the city's capacity is a good action plan prioritization item. San Diego, item 6, San Diego Housing Commission. I would be in support of seeing how we can better access the assets that commission has and advance our residents here to use them. I do agree with including transportation components of planning for affordable housing on the limited basis that we've just talked about. And let's see, I don't favor the advisory collaboration for public engagement. I think we're doing that here, and I am in favor of item 10. So I'm not going to make a motion yet, and I will leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Hensy.
I think you can make a motion. There were just 2 comments that I felt differently from you about, but I think that that's a good basis for a motion. For the just cause eviction, I do think it's worth us exploring this issue because I know we did a lot of good work last year. Well, my colleagues did a lot of good work last year on amending our short-term vacation rental ordinance, but I do think that there's some more work that could be done to prevent displacement due to the creation of short-term rentals. And if we can get there through just cause eviction specific for Encinitas, then I think that would be worth exploring. And then the only other comment that I was going to suggest is that we have 2 great commissions, the Public Health and Safety Commission along with the Senior Commission, that might be able to help us further refine some of these recommendations. So my recommendation is rather than creating a whole other group to vet some of these, that we take our suggestions to both of these commissions and see if they have more input for us.
Feel free to make that as a motion if you like.
You accept those 2 suggestions?
Your suggestions were to bring it to the commissions for assistance with vetting what would be included in the action plan before it comes back to us?
Yeah, and then I think you mentioned you don't support further exploring just cause evictions, but I think it's worth it if we can figure out a way to prevent displacement for short-term rentals.
If we could recharacterize it as investigate ways to prevent displacement, I think that's a broader and less specific to a term that's kind of known as something specific. So it broadens it to look at displacement in a larger way.
Okay.
So I'd agree with if we could change the wording.
All right, let's see. So you listed really nicely, I think you said 1 through 7 and number 10, and we're holding off on number 9 and number 8, but rather to vet these recommendations through our Public Health and Safety Commission and our Senior Commission.
That I did not say 1, but it's education for staff, policymakers, and the public. I'm not actually sure where we need that, but and I would I'm very in support of 3 through 7 and 10, and then 2 if we could modify it to prevent displacement.
Okay. I guess with the recommendation number 1, part of what we discussed and what I supported from what Ms. Beauchamp said was conducting workshops to educate folks on how to attain affordable housing. So I guess it's not exactly an education on what racial equity means, but there might be a dimension of that in affordable housing workshops. So I do support education. I don't support it, I don't think it needs to be mandatory for all the policymakers and staff, but if there are resources that come through these workshops, I support that.
I wonder if we could take a little different approach and maybe scratch 8 and 9 and then ask for an item to come back relatively quickly that puts a little more meat on the bones of 1 through 7 and 10, so that we could get a sense of, I mean, I think there is some low-hanging fruit here, and I don't necessarily want to get it kind of delayed by too much if in fact it's something that we can adopt. I share your support of recommendation 2, but I would go one step further and ask that when looking at what we might do for policies related to the just cause eviction, which I have received emails from people frantic about losing their, being evicted, and what they really needed was some legal aid. And so whether we funded some resources, put some resources aside for legal aid for folks in that situation, I have no idea how much it would take, but that might be an important step. The other thing that I am aware of is that rent evictions do impact our community, and oftentimes it is people in the more affordable units that find that they're being evicted for under the new law that allowed the eviction for renovations. But the threshold for renovations we should probably define, because I have seen situations where there weren't permits being pulled for an address where rent eviction was being exercised, which suggests that maybe the work that they were claiming to be doing wasn't really significant enough to qualify to rent evict somebody. So Long Beach adopted an ordinance that specified what it takes to reach the threshold where it's legal to make a rent eviction. So I would like to include that in as part of the recommendation 2 that staff look at that. So would there be some consideration, Joy, to maybe looking at bundling a little bit more than you are focused on and ask staff to bring back a little bit more information for decision making?
Sure, I'd be happy to make that motion then. I think maybe there's an assumption I've already drafted it, so let me just make it. We move forward but exclude recommendations 8 and 9 to ask staff to come back with a more refined explanation of the items we're moving forward.
Is that enough direction, staff? Do you need more information than that, or can you?
Yeah, I think that's pretty good. I wanted to be sure that there are a couple other things that we heard that I just want to be sure if they're going to be included or not, such as we talked about the bilingual housing navigator. It really doesn't fit into, some sort of housing navigator was brought up a couple times. Didn't really see that fitting directly into any of these things.
I'll
but
help
we
you clarify that. I think it's under item 5, which expand the city's capacity, which would include a bilingual housing navigator.
So and I also want to say too that you don't have to just stick to the numbers. We're looking for your recommendations. This is the study they came up with. That's really the way it's worded is regard to fair housing complaints. I think I think one of the things that we could look at, and rather than come back with just the numbers, is we'll use these numbers to put titles on the various recommendations associated with those numbers, and one of them could be fair housing. And that could be, that could include all the fair housing issues that we heard tonight, from the rent eviction issue, which is also, I think, related to that, not just the just cause piece, to the housing navigator, to the actual continued support for fair housing complaints as well. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Tony's suggestion was a good one, and it was like to help consolidate with all the affordable units coming online, a single hub at City Hall or a person that can help navigate each one of those projects.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And we actually do have someone on staff that actually has that function. I think we could, basically as a part of what we come back with, we could talk more about what that person does and potentially make that more known and more available.
That'd be great. And I think that, the question is, if the job changes a little bit because of this if there are additional duties, if there's resourcing that's necessary, we need to know that, obviously. And so I think that's the key. And you guys have taken some notes. I know Bruce likes to keep things in, in the motions, but I think that we've given some direction Councilmember Black, or Deputy Mayor Blackwell, I'm sorry, I didn't.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I just, when we were talking about number 2, that seems like ancient history now, but when we were talking about recommendation number 2 about just cause eviction, it evolved to ways to prevent displacement. We talked about rent evictions, but I think overall that umbrella is how do we protect our existing affordable housing stock? And we may have more in our control there of what we can do. So maybe I would just put that umbrella wrapper around it. That was it.
Councilmember Ehlers.
Yeah, and in this spirit, I think, Carrie, you said that we don't have to limit it to 10 or now 8. So I don't know whether these fit in some of the existing, but there were some recommendations sprinkled throughout. On page 58 or 59, the report said add tracking for the LASSD's arbitration cases as a way to better understand, since we are only tracking the actual cases that get filed and not some of the informal arbitration, it would give us a metric that tell whether or not we have resourced that enough. I thought that was a good recommendation. And I don't know where, so I'm going to maybe put an additional recommendation if the council will agree with this. And it's really better transparency for the allocation of lower income units. You know, we had a whole lawsuit over that, and there have been some comments tonight about various units that got sold and how do you get to them. So I don't know whether this fits in number 5 as another component of it, but I would recommend we have a review or a transparent, open, and fair documentation and training, education on our housing voucher process and where they all are, and the waiting list. And same thing with the lower income units the city is managing, so that it's very transparent what it is and how they got allocated. And when we get into that discussion, I would love to see, rather than selling it to the high bidder, have some level of, if we have an oversubscribed waiting list, that there is a random number selection and people know it's fair, that of the qualified candidates, there is no bias. There is no racial bias. There is no, if you qualify for the low-income unit, then you're in the pool on the waiting list and people can see where they are. So I think it's probably a whole new item of reviewing our allocation of lower-income units, be it housing voucher or inclusionary, et cetera.
If we add that recommendation, will you vote for this?
Yeah, where are you going right now? I would, actually.
So what I'm hearing is navigation and transparency when it comes to the affordable housing. And I also heard protect and preserve existing affordable housing. And I'd like to amend my motion to include those two.
Okay, thank you.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, see no other requests to speak. I think, is it clear as mud over there, or?
I think between the recommendations that were included in the study and how we've discussed it tonight, I think we have a pretty good idea of what to come back with.
Okay, thank you. We will vote now.
Motion carries unanimously.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, that takes us to item number 11, which is a informational item, a climate action plan update from our sustainability manager, Crystal Nahara.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. I'll be speaking, my name is Crystal Nahara. I'm the Sustainability Manager. I'll be speaking on item 11A, which is the Climate Action Plan update. I'll start with just giving a brief overview of the generally understood climate action planning cycle. So it's a 5-step cycle. It starts with conducting a baseline assessment of what your greenhouse gas emissions are within a given geographic area. And then based on that, a city would establish goals, so where you would want to reduce your emissions to in a given time frame. Then developing the plan on how you would get there, so really identifying the measures or the programs and projects and such that you would incorporate into your city work to actually achieve those goals. And then the final two are the implementation component, which includes implementing the policies and measures and then monitoring to verify your progress. So as a city, we've actually completed this cycle a couple of times. We are here at this point to actually update our climate action plan again. And so tonight I'll be going through that process that has been kicked off, and we are at the early stages of it, and I wanted to give you a status of where we're at. So just to give a little bit of background, I will share with you our current climate action plan and what some of the metrics are there, and that is the basis for which we will do the updating. We have a very strong climate action plan already, so the structure is already there, the elements are there, and from my perspective, there's the update won't be as substantial as probably the last time that we did an update. So the current CAP has a baseline of the year 2012, and in that year we had roughly 460,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions. And a little over half was from transportation, and then about a third from electricity and natural gas. And then the remainder, small portion from solid waste, water, off-road transportation, and wastewater. And the current CAP had 2 targets. It had a target for the year 2020 to get 13% below our 2012 baseline by 2020. And then the second target was to get 44% below our 2012 baseline by 2030. And then the remainder of the CAP included the 20 measures that are numeric reduction target, that have numeric reduction targets. Many supporting measures were included. It included an implementation plan and a focus on green jobs and social equity. And then finally, it had a climate adaptation component where it looked at what the city would need to do to adapt and what strategies we would need to implement. So these are the 20 measures that were included in our current CAP. And I wanted to share with you the latest on the progress thus far in the past 5 years of implementation. So we have completed 12 of the 20, and we have 2 additional that are funded but not complete. 4 are partially funded, and then 2 are unfunded. So this is kind of our starting point for the update, is to look at what we've completed so far and what is still kind of on the bench to be folded into budgeting and get completed by the time our target dates roll around. So just to give you a little bit more detail on some of these measures, they consist of measures within 7 strategy categories. So we have strategy 1, which is building efficiency measures. We've implemented or are nearly implemented most of these. Most of them are related to building code amendments, which we've done or are looking at possibly revising. And then the last one is addressing energy efficiency of our municipal buildings. Under strategy 2, that focuses on renewable energy measures. 3 of these measures are complete. That's establishing a community choice energy program, and then a couple of building codes for residential and commercial solar. We're still looking at ways to fund solar on municipal facilities. Under strategy 3, which is water efficiency, we've effectively been able to complete this measure through water rate studies through our water districts. Under strategy 4, which addresses transportation, excuse me, we've got about half that have been completed here. The two of them for regarding EV charging are related to code amendments that require additional EV charging at residential and commercial locations. The top three measures relate to ongoing and more long-term projects, so implementing our active transportation plan, looking at establishing a local shuttle system, and then installing some roundabouts throughout the city to improve traffic flow. The measures at the very bottom of the strategy 4 are related to municipal activities, so improving the efficiency of our municipal fleet, and then lastly, implementing an employee telecommute policy, which we did within the last year or so. Strategy 5 is related to, it's really focused on our leaf blower ordinance, which was adopted a few years ago. And then Strategy 6 relates to our zero waste program, which has also been implemented and is continuing to improve. And then lastly, Strategy 7 is regarding carbon sequestration and adding to our urban tree canopy. So with that in mind, what the update is going to do is spend roughly the next year looking at our climate action plan and seeing how we can make improvements to it. The first thing that that the update will do is reassess our baseline. Where are we at today, and what's going to be the metric by which we compare ourselves as we go through the next 5 years. So that inventory has actually been completed. I'll show it to you in a second. And then we look at projections of our greenhouse gas emissions and where we expect them to be in the next couple of decades. Based on that data, the city would decide where we want our targeted emissions reductions to be. We look at what the federal and state government are doing to reduce emissions, and then layer on what can the city do to additionally reduce emissions. So during this second phase, we'll hold a public workshop that's actually going to take place. The first one is going to take place on January 30th, so it's right around the corner. And then in this phase 3, that's when we, once the targets are established, draft targets are established, we start looking at what measures that need to be implemented in order to meet those targets. So we'll definitely be gathering public input in this phase, also going to the Environmental Commission to hear their input, and then doing an online survey. What we really want to hear here is the community to look at our existing measures and consider what should remain, what needs to be, what could be revised, or if there's any that we recommend adding to that list. The next step, once there's a draft set of measures, is to turn that into an actual fully fleshed out draft climate action plan. That draft plan we'd hold a third workshop to review that plan, and then also have the Environmental Commission and Council review and consider the plan and provide recommendations. Once that those recommendations have been heard by staff, we will fold in those changes to that draft document and then bring back a final version of the document to the Environmental Commission to hopefully make a recommendation to Council to adopt it, and then have Council adopt it at that time. During phases 4 and 5, there will be a CEQA document that will be developed associated with the environmental impacts of the climate action plan, and that will be addressed as part of this process as well. The last step, of course, is once it's adopted, to go back to implementing and monitoring. So I'll share with you the updated greenhouse gas emissions baseline that has been developed by our consultants. So our new baseline, the best available data year, the furthest we are able to go back is 2016. So in 2016, we had roughly 380,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions get emitted into the air. With this updated year, we are seeing that more of our emissions are coming from transportation, just a little bit more. We still have a a good sector coming from electricity and natural gas, and then some emissions also coming from solid waste, transportation, water, and wastewater. The other thing that our consultant has done is taken a look at the projected emissions based on existing known regulations. So this graph goes out to the year 2050 and looks at what federal and California vehicle standards will be impacting our emissions, essentially reducing our emissions over time. That's that blue section of the chart. And then it also incorporates the California and San Diego Community Power renewable standards. That's the red bar, and that will further reduce our emissions for our local community. So what we need to do now as a city is look at the remaining emissions in gray and decide how much or what we can do to further reduce those emissions through implementation of certain measures. So if you look at the year 2030, we do have a current existing cap target there. That's the point that's in green. And there's a couple of suggested targets on this chart. These are by no means, of course, they're not certain. These are suggested based on state guidelines and state goals on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a possibility of looking at a 2030 target that would be 40% below the 2016 baseline year. And then in 2045, we could look at being 85% below 2016. Again, staff will engage the public and look to hear from them on what their interest level is in terms of target years and percent reductions, and of course, look to hear from the Environmental Commission and Council on that as well. So I will move on to the next slide. So this is just a recap. I'm not going to go over this again, just kind of a reminder that this is really the bulk of what the CAP will be doing, excuse me, is looking at these measures, either confirming that, yes, we would like to keep them in, revising them if necessary, or revamping them, or possibly adding additional ones. Lastly, I'll end with just a reminder that kind of the next step is to hold the public meeting. It'll be on Tuesday, January 30th. It's at the Encinitas Library, and it'll start at 5:30 p.m. So happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Councilmember Hensy.
Thank you. Thanks for the update, Crystal. It's always great to hear about your hard work, and I'm really proud of us as a city, and a lot of that's thanks to you and what you've been able to accomplish here. I did have a couple questions. The first one is, and it was mentioned in our last item too, about our application for the citywide shuttle. When are we going to find out if we received that or not?
So we did hear that we're not successful in getting the Caltrans grant.
Okay.
But we are applying for another grant, and that is a grant that is non-competitive and already pre-allocated funds, so we know that for sure we're going to get those funds if council supports applying for this particular grant. It's so that will be coming to council very soon. Actually, next month we are planning to bring that grant request to you to apply for that grant, and then we would be able to start that project. I believe we would be provided the grant money, I believe, this summer. I'll provide you more details, but that will be happening with that other grant funding.
That's great. Thank you. I have a lot of detailed questions, but I think it's late in the evening, and so I'll leave them. But just some things that, it's been a long time since I picked up the Climate Action Plan and took a look at it, but some things that have become important to all of us as a council and councils prior to, but just through carbon sequestration. I know we've had our focus on planting trees in the urban areas, but I think now we're starting to think more about the habitat stewardship of our open spaces, and even things like our living shoreline, which added vegetation to a place that previously was just riprap. How do we start kind of creating targets for our open space and thinking about acquisition of open space, things like that, because this is a personal goal of ours, one that is often unattainable due to the high cost of land in this city. But one grant that you and I corresponded about was this immense amount of money coming from the federal government, the EPA pollution reduction grant, which we're applying for. So as this funding is so abundant for the country, how can we as Encinitas on the forefront of climate action planning start getting some of that significant money to expand those aspects?
Yeah, so those other additional ways that we could possibly sequester carbon is something that we could look at through this process. So right now we just have the one goal for planting trees, but there's other vegetation and blue carbon through our oceans that we could also be sequestering carbon. So that's definitely something that we could look at and have the consultant take a technical look at. And what they would do is look at whether we could actually put numbers to those measures, or those proposals, and that's what's really key in the CAP planning process is identifying measures that we can quantify how much reduction we could get from them. We have many supporting measures in the CAP, and of course we can always add to those, but those are the ones that are hard to quantify and can help support, but are not always able to be specifically accounted for. So I guess my short answer is yes, we can look at those suggestions and see if they could pencil out.
Great, thank you. And then just two more, because bringing up community power, that was such a big lift for us, and now it's this amazing part of our goal that's been achieved. And I think the next phase of planning for collaboration with other agencies would be like potable reuse for our wastewater, and then also, I guess, I'll leave that aside, but just something like potable reuse, which right now seems like, it's just outside of our grasp, but with collaboration with our agencies we all represent, perhaps we can get there.
Yeah.
Councilmember Lyons.
I love the ideas just discussed about thinking outside the box, and thank you for always doing that, because I feel like you are. I think we have an environment here, a culture in our community that's supportive of doing the best possible with our climate action plan, so thank you. And with that in mind, the consultant and you may be already thinking in this way, but I thought I'd say it, and that is when you bring it to public meeting, there's a lot of non-technical people who really care, and it's always valuable for me when you present what other agencies, what other municipalities are doing and how they can measure and achieve results as a good example of the things that we might think of doing as well. So you might have already thought of that, but there are some good ideas out there. Maybe some of them are a little bit more novel than that we could take on. We feel like we have the fortitude to take them on. And some of them might be more new than 5 years ago, and so there might be more data that would support us taking them on.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. We can simplify the language in our public workshops to make it very inclusive, but then also welcome ideas. And your point about having many ideas already out there, I know that SANDAG keeps kind of a running inventory of all of our local CAP measures that all the cities in the region have done. So, and I believe our consultant even helped develop that list. So they're well aware of all of those other potential ideas that we could adopt and not reinvent the wheel and incorporate into ours. And they'll be throwing those out at the workshop, or offering them as suggestions on what we could include in ours as well.
So one question, I think it was the Ninth Circuit and Berkeley decided they were not going to take it up with the full panel. So Berkeley is considering appealing to the Supreme Court, but when can we expect to have a conversation about possible modifications to our natural gas ban?
Very soon, actually. Our not so new anymore staff person, our sustainability analyst, she's been working on that very issue. And we have some ideas about ways that we can pivot with the code and still and strongly encourage, but not require electric building. So it's an idea that's kind of other cities in the state are kind of identifying as kind of the next best opportunity. It has to do with performance levels of your energy efficiency in a building, and kind of raising that level to a higher bar in a local jurisdiction, and kind of getting people to opt for electric design in order to meet that higher performance
So
standard.
maybe February, or do we know?
Yeah, Mayor Kranz, if I can interject.
Yeah.
So the city of Berkeley has 90 days to appeal to the United States Supreme Court. That is, file a writ of certiorari to the Supreme Court. That deadline will expire in very early April, because the opinion was issued on the 2nd of January. So 90 days from that is early April.
Okay. So we'll wait for that before we have an agenda item, or?
Well, staff will be monitoring the situation, and we'll bring it forward when the time is right.
Very good. I'm sorry, whoever signed up to speak publicly, Sheila, I'm very sorry. I should have asked sooner. Would you like to come and speak now? I thought you were this was entertainment for you or something, yes.
Well, it is. But thank you. Okay. First of all, I was surprised to see this as an informational item. I think it really belongs on the agenda. But having sat here through it, the workshop is a great idea, and how are you going to get the communication out? Because what happens is, this is less than 2 weeks away, and people aren't going to know about it. And I really think it's worth sending some things out and letting people know ahead of time, so that you get turnout. Instead of like 129 people on this survey, I don't know what happened. Open space. Indian Head Canyon, we have 63 acres. How many of you have ever been there? Yay! 1, 2, 3. Okay, good. I'm happy to give a tour. The thing is, that is being very neglected. Trees are being chopped down and just left every which way. And some of them are impeding on some of our natural trees, like the Toyon trees and stuff, and that's destroying them. So we need to protect what is there and get out of the way the things that aren't. You might see if people want to buy the stubs for their fireplace or whatever to carve or something, but get that stuff out of there. It's a little scary. I know there are two schools of thought: leave things natural, let them, I don't believe in that, not in this case, saying we cut them down. I think that, and speaking of open space, L7, why are you putting 45 houses on it when you could, that money that's in the open space isn't very much, but it's a start to plant some trees, put in some paths, make that a nice open space park. We need it. That's our land. Don't just throw it away. And I think you need to protect trees that we already have. And there are several places around here. When we did the original tree maintenance and the policy, there was the idea in there that staff would say to developers, let's take a look at the trees on your property and try to save them in your development. And that doesn't seem to be happening. Also, there's supposed to be biology tests and walkthroughs on planned project areas that have trees and trees have birds and other wildlife, and that's not happening. So there are some people I'm going to inform to come to this meeting on the 30th, but I wish you would find a way to get the word out, because if I wasn't sitting here, I'd never find out about it. I guess that's about all I have to say, but I really wish this had been a regular agenda item. Boo. Okay, bye.
Thank you. Councilman Raylers.
Just a quick one. I actually saw it last night on Facebook. So I actually got a city Facebook ad. Sheila?
I don't do Facebook.
Oh, okay. I'm just saying, the city I think that came out of our social media group, out of the city manager's office, but I actually saw a really nice, easy to read, and I grabbed it and put it in my calendar. So.
And speaking of trees, I think, is the Development Services Department working on a look at our, I think, which element is it in? I can't remember. Nature, trees?
Mature trees?
Yeah, mature trees.
That's not on the agenda? The mature trees, that's not on
No,
the agenda tonight?
so,
or-
but it's part of our, did you see there, it talked about
Yes.
urban forest on
Yes.
that thing?
Oh, well, look at Carrie's available.
Yeah, we have been working on mature tree ordinance, and we do expect that to be coming back in the near future. I can't give an exact date, but
Has
it's
it been to
something
the
we'd
planning
like to get
commission
back.
yet?
Actually, the last thing that occurred was a combined planning commission, urban forest advisory committee meeting, and we need to bring forward information on that.
So we're making progress.
Yes.
It's coming. All right, that's good to know. And then finally, one last thing on the climate action plan. We did the good thing, which was we banned gas-powered leaf blowers, but our enforcement tools are terrible, and I see them all over town. And so I don't know what other cities are doing to enforce theirs, whether there are other ideas out there. I don't necessarily want to reinvent the wheel, but I do think that with all of our environmental ordinances, including plastic bag ban, styrofoam ban, straw ban, all of these bans that we've had, it's doesn't do a daggum bit of good if you're not figuring out ways to enforce it. So maybe we should have an agenda item that looks at each of these and explores ways that we can do a better job of enforcing them. Okay. No other speakers requests? Were you requesting to speak?
I was that.
Okay. She was just poised like she was going to smack me or something here. Let's see. So that means we are done. Thank you, Crystal. Thank you for sticking around, Carrie. I think that's it. We're moving on to the next item, which I believe is AB 1234 reports.
Nothing to report.
Nothing to report.
Just a quick report, tomorrow at San Diego Community Power, we'll be adopting our rates for the next season and then the summer season. And then I'll be serving as chair for San Elijo JPA for the next year.
And nothing to report other than I went to the San Elijo JPA meeting with Kelly yesterday.
I had a Sandag meeting, first of the year. We had a vigorous discussion about the tolling, the failure of the tolling system on the 125 in the south part of the county, and we're ending up having to hire a couple of companies to redo the whole thing. So it's a huge hit. It's many millions of dollars. It's unfortunate. The contractor, who's been around for about 7 years, the system has never worked. Unfortunately, we can't just fire that contractor because they hold the key to a whole lot of data, and if we were to fire them, we would basically shut down the tolling system, and it's just about the biggest mess you could ever imagine. So we're working on it, and hopefully we'll get to the point where it's ancient history and things are working right. That was the item that night. And are there any city manager reports?
Just one quick report, Mr. Mayor. Just a really brief update on Beacons Beach closure. Our geotechnical engineer is continuing to monitor Beacons and is close to finalizing his evaluation of the bluff failure and damages to the trail access. We hope to receive the report by the end of this week or early next week, and we'll keep you updated. In the meantime, the trail access is still closed, but the parking lot is open, and we've increased our signage, including a QR code, as well as information on the website that you can keep updated on all of that information.
Thank you. City attorney reports.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was going to report on the Berkeley case, but that has been covered in our previous agenda item.
Thank you, sir. City clerk reports.
Just my usual, we still have our commission recruitment is still open. Incumbents applications are due tomorrow by 5, and then all other applications are due by next Thursday at 5 o'clock p.m.
Okay, thank you. I did attend on Saturday a funeral mass for two very special people, Pat and Joe Wonkett, longtime residents of Levenhain. They are special to me because I attended St. John's School with their sons and spent a lot of time after school at their house out in Levenhain. I learned to ride a motorcycle out there, and they were just the kindest people that you could ever imagine. Later in life, Mr. Wonkett built the cabinets that I have in my house. He and his wife were in the construction business forever. They were contractors. They were married for 67 years. Pat died first almost a year ago, and then it took about 6 months before Joe passed away. And the celebration of their life was as expected. Quite a few people showed up. They were a really important part of the St. John's Catholic community. Great people, and I would like to adjourn this meeting tonight in their honor. Joe and Pat Wonkett.